Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a very slow walk into the world of ancient Greek gymnasiums. Those marble courtyards, dusty tracks, and echoing colonnades where citizens worked up a sweat without the benefit of polyester sportswear. You'll hear the shuffle of sandals on stone, the hum of chatter, and maybe the faint sound of someone scraping olive oil off their arm with a bronze strigil. It's a peaceful place, but also a little absurd. Imagine turning up to your local fitness center and being told, "Sure, but first please remove all your clothes, because otherwise how would anyone know you're serious about your push-ups?" You probably wouldn't survive that check-in process. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, I'd love it if you drop a comment with your location and the local time where you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the heart of an ancient Greek city. The sun is lowering toward the horizon, streaking everything in honey-colored light. You step lightly across the uneven paving stones, following the lazy trickle of citizens drifting in the same direction. Everyone seems to be moving toward a great open space, a cluster of structures you've heard about since you were a child. The gymnasium, not just a sweaty place of exercise, but a civic hub, a gathering point for training body and mind. It's something between a sports complex, a social club, and a very dusty library. Your eyes wander to the walls, made of pale stone warmed by the day's heat. The scent of olive oil wafts on the breeze, mixed with dust and faint traces of roasted barley bread from a nearby vendor. You pause just outside the arched gateway, peering in. Inside, you can already hear the grunts of young men wrestling, the scrape of sandals over gravel, the creak of leather straps, and occasionally the melodic drift of someone practicing a flute. The first thing you notice is scale. Greek gymnasiums aren't tiny sweatboxes like some cramped modern gyms. They sprawl with open courtyards, running tracks, shady colonnades where philosophers loiter, and bathhouses where tired athletes steam themselves into a stupor. The atmosphere is not frantic. It's not an iron-pumping, energy drink kind of vibe. It's measured, communal, and yes, a little boring in that oddly comforting way that makes it perfect for you to drift off to. You walk past a group of older men leaning against columns, engaged in conversation. Their tunics suggest they're not planning to exercise. They're here for the talk. One mentions a debate about whether nudity in sport was practical, less fabric to snag during a wrestling hold, or purely symbolic, representing the freedom and purity of the Greek citizen. Historians still argue whether this was about efficiency or philosophy, and you imagine them shrugging. Why not both? Further along, you notice something odd, a pair of guards near the entrance with stern expressions. You recall that gymnasiums weren't just sports centers. They were restricted spaces for citizens, carefully managed. Foreigners might peek in, but they rarely joined the training. There were rules here, some strict, some almost laughably petty. There's a story about one city fining an athlete for sneezing too loudly during a race. You smile to yourself. Not exactly the scandal of the century, but a reminder that the Greeks loved order, even when it came to nasal interruptions. As you wander deeper, you can almost feel the dusty sand crunch beneath your feet, the smoothness of marble beneath your palm when you steady yourself against a column. The gymnasium breathes with calm rhythm. Footsteps, murmurs, the occasional cheer when someone completes a difficult discus throw. It's the heartbeat of the city, but a heartbeat at rest, not in frenzy. Somewhere in the back, you catch the faint notes of a lyre. It blends with the rustle of trees planted along the walkways. Plane trees, their broad leaves providing pools of shade. Birds nestle there, their twilight calls mixing with the chatter below. You let the sounds soak into you, realizing how intentionally these spaces were designed to calm as well as invigorate. Training the body, yes, but also softening the mind into conversation and contemplation. You recall a quirky tidbit you once overheard. Some athletes were so committed to the idea of natural training that they refused to wear even sandals. They padded barefoot across hot gravel, insisting the sting was part of their discipline. Whether that was admirable toughness or just questionable decision-making remains open for debate. Still, it paints a picture of dedication bordering on stubbornness. And so you find yourself lingering at the edge of this world. Toes touching sand, ears full of the day's sounds, and eyes roaming across the sweep of columns and tracks. The gymnasium doesn't demand you join in. It simply lets you be, whether you wish to wrestle, to watch, or to drift gently into thought. You shuffle forward through the great stone archway, leaving the noise of the city behind you. The market stalls fade, their cries of olives for sale, figs for a good price, amphorae stacked like dominoes. All of that dims as you step into a different sort of world. The path here is swept clean, though dust settles quickly in the Greek sun, and your sandals scuff a faint rhythm as you move along. The gymnasium complex doesn't rise all at once. Instead, it sprawls, low walls guiding you like sleepy arms into a wide-open court. Before you even see the athletes, you sense the rhythm of the place. Small clusters of people gather near the entrance. Some are already stripping down, folding their chitons neatly and tucking them onto benches. Others stand half-dressed, arguing lazily about who owed whom an amphora of wine after last week's race. You glance back at the gates and realize how deliberately they were placed, on the main road, so that entering the gymnasium feels like crossing from civic bustle into civic ritual. You are leaving the noise of vendors and chatter about taxes behind, and entering a world of slow, ritualized movement. Just beyond the gates, a row of vendors lingers, not inside but close enough to catch business. Their goods aren't figs or amphorae this time. These men sell oil, little bronze strigils, and occasionally bundles of herbs to rub into aching joints. You note the faint, nutty smell of olive oil drifting from clay jars. Some of these jars bear little carved symbols, an owl for Athens, a dolphin for another city, each marking the supplier. And then the voices. As you wander deeper into the complex, you catch the overlapping hum of conversation. One group is discussing philosophy, another is reliving last year's Panathenaic Games. One man declares loudly that he could have outrun the champion had he not been recovering from an unfortunate ankle twist while chasing chickens. His friends roll their eyes. That, apparently, is the ancient version of, "I could have gone pro if my knee hadn't given out." The first main courtyard opens wide before you. Plane trees are spaced deliberately, offering pools of shade where men sit cross-legged, stretching or simply chatting. Some younger boys chase each other across the dusty space, darting around older men who look on with indulgent amusement. There is no shouting, no whistles, no blaring gym music, just the steady shuffle of movement. You notice the architecture now. Low colonnades line the courtyard, their Doric columns simple but solid, forming cool shaded walkways. Each colonnade leads off to more specialized areas: wrestling pits, running tracks, lecture halls. You think of how modern gyms have different rooms. Cardio machines here, free weights there. The Greeks had a similar impulse, but with less neon lighting and more birdsong. A pair of philosophers strolls by, gesturing with animated hands. One carries a small scroll tucked under his arm, as though he has just finished lecturing. He pauses, scanning the courtyard. "Is the soul trained by sweat?" he asks the other, who shakes his head, replying that sweat is only for bodies, and the mind requires loftier pursuits. Historians still argue whether philosophers used gymnasiums primarily as classrooms, or simply hung around to recruit followers. Either way, their voices blend with the grunts of wrestlers and the rustle of branches overhead. The atmosphere is both lively and slow, like a summer afternoon that refuses to rush. You imagine yourself slipping down onto one of the benches, the stone cool beneath you. Around you, boys practice recitations of Homer, repeating lines until their voices blend into a drone. One trips over the meter and earns a gentle correction from his instructor. The boy groans. You think of high school students stumbling over Shakespeare, and the similarity makes you chuckle softly. Some things never change. Near the far edge of the courtyard, a young man oils his arms methodically, preparing for exercise. He works slowly, rubbing oil in long strokes. Another man teases him for being vain, and they laugh together. The teasing is gentle, good-natured, like brothers poking fun at each other before a game. You're reminded that in these spaces, nudity wasn't shocking. It was expected. It was part of belonging to this civic world. Still, a part of you smirks at the thought of showing up at your local gym today, immediately stripping down and calmly asking for a jar of olive oil. The front desk would probably ask you to leave. As you pause, letting the sun sink lower, you take in the scale again. Gymnasiums could stretch across several acres. They were not private clubs, but civic investments, funded and maintained with pride. An official passing by inspects a cracked column base, making notes on a wax tablet. Repairs would need to be arranged before the next festival. Civic pride was at stake, and no one wanted a visiting ambassador to see crumbling plaster. The air is growing cooler now, shadows lengthening. The courtyard hums with life, but not urgency. You lean back, breathing in the mingled scents of oil, dust, and faint incense from a nearby shrine. You've barely begun to explore. There are wrestling grounds, running tracks, even bathhouses waiting beyond. But for now, just standing here at the heart of the gymnasium, you feel the rhythm of an entire culture wrapped around you like a blanket. You drift further into the courtyard, letting your gaze roam along the colonnades. The architecture almost hums with symmetry. Columns repeating in quiet rhythm, their bases worn smooth by years of sandals brushing past. The late afternoon sun filters between them, throwing long bands of light and shadow across the ground. You follow those stripes like a lazy cat chasing sunlight patches, your footsteps echoing faintly. The first impressions of this central space are subtle rather than dramatic. There's no blare of trumpets, no ceremonial announcements. Instead, you notice the calm balance between activity and rest. To your left, two men stretch their arms overhead, their movements slow and deliberate, backs arching like bowstrings before relaxing again. To your right, an older man dozes against a column, his head tilted, a faint snore escaping as though even the gymnasium itself provides lullabies. The colonnades shelter small groups of students. Some sit cross-legged on mats, muttering lines of poetry in unison. Others lean back, twirling strigils idly in their hands, waiting their turn to train. The atmosphere isn't rushed. It's as though everyone trusts there is enough time. No frantic schedules. No spin class at 6. Just a steady current of bodies drifting between exercise, conversation, and rest. At the far end of the courtyard, you glimpse a statue of Hermes, slender and poised. The god of athletes, travelers, and, inconveniently, thieves, he stands as the patron of the gymnasium. Someone has left a garland of wilted flowers at his feet, a small act of devotion. You wonder how many athletes muttered quick prayers to Hermes before stepping onto the wrestling sand, hoping his swiftness might rub off. Historians still argue whether such rituals were deeply believed or merely polite gestures, like wishing someone good luck without much conviction. Your attention shifts back to the courtyard itself. The surface underfoot isn't polished marble. It's packed sand, raked smooth earlier in the day. The sand absorbs the sound of footsteps, softening the space into something hushed and intimate. When two boys sprint across it, their strides are almost silent, like ghosts darting past. You bend slightly, brushing your fingers through the grains. They're warm from the sun, clinging faintly to your skin, carrying the faint scent of earth baked under endless summers. Nearby, a young athlete demonstrates stretches for his friends. He leans into a deep bend, then twists, showing off both flexibility and an easy confidence. One of his friends claps slowly, mockingly impressed. The group chuckles. You notice the camaraderie here. It's not fierce competition at every moment, but an odd blend of rivalry and friendship. Athletes joke as much as they train. The goal is excellence, yes, but also shared belonging. You glance back at the colonnades again. Their shaded walkways feel like arteries, carrying the lifeblood of conversation and philosophy. A pair of scholars debates vigorously, their voices rising and falling like waves. One argues that training the body purifies the soul, while the other scoffs that sweating in sand is hardly divine. Their students listen dutifully, nodding, though one boy looks distracted, tracing patterns in the sand with his toe. You imagine him thinking about dinner rather than metaphysics. It's comforting. Across millennia, students daydream in class just the same. There's a quirky tidbit you recall. Some gymnasiums enforced silence in certain colonnades, believing that too much chatter distracted from both exercise and learning. Yet here, the hum of voices is part of the atmosphere, a white noise that feels oddly soothing. You think of modern libraries where whispers somehow echo louder than normal speech. The Greeks would have sympathized. The smells here deepen as the day goes on. Olive oil mixed with sweat, dust hanging in the air, and the faint sweetness of figs carried in by boys snacking after practice. Your stomach rumbles softly, but you smile at the thought. Imagine bringing snacks onto a modern treadmill, crunching grapes while jogging. Yet, in this space, food and exercise intermingle without shame. As the light shifts again, your eyes catch the faint shimmer of bronze mirrors hung on one wall. Athletes use them to check form. Or perhaps just to admire the way oil glistens across their shoulders. You can almost hear the modern complaint. That guy spends more time flexing in the mirror than training. Some things, it seems, never change. You pause in the center of the courtyard, drawing a long breath. The air is warm but not oppressive, touched by breezes sneaking between the columns. Around you, activity continues, steady and unhurried. Wrestlers prepare in one corner, philosophers argue in another, boys recite poetry, and somewhere a flute plays a tune both simple and haunting. The entire gymnasium feels alive, but alive in a way that lulls rather than agitates. If you were to describe it to someone back home, you'd say, imagine a park, a school, a spa, and a sports field all layered into one, with an extra dash of eccentric ritual. Not chaotic, not loud, but balanced, woven together in a harmony you can almost taste in the dust-filled air. The day moves slowly, the sun crawling higher as you linger near the courtyard. Your eyes wander toward a shaded walkway, and there you see the beginnings of a daily ritual unfolding. Early risers gather in loose circles, their bodies glistening faintly in the light. Some are already bare, others fold their chitons neatly on low benches, tucking sandals beneath. What comes next seems both ordinary and strange, the careful application of oil. Each man dips his fingers into a small flask, scooping golden liquid and smoothing it across skin in long strokes. Shoulders first, then arms, chest, legs, until the whole body gleams faintly like polished bronze. The oil serves many purposes, protecting against dust, easing friction during wrestling, and perhaps some whisper, drawing the eye of onlookers. You stand nearby, the nutty scent drifting around you, and you can almost feel the texture, slick yet comforting. One young athlete rubs oil onto his companion's back, laughing as the man squirms. Too cold, he protests, though the morning air is already warm. A third man teases that the squealing is worse than the wrestling. Everyone chuckles, and you realize the ritual is not solemn but social. It is as much about camaraderie as about preparation. You think of modern locker rooms, athletes joking and teasing before practice. The mood hasn't changed across millennia, just the wardrobe has. As you watch, a trainer strolls past, arms folded, observing the oiling ritual. He shakes his head at one boy who slathers too generously, muttering something about slipping like a fish in the wrestling pit. Historians still argue whether the Greeks genuinely believed oil made muscles stronger, or whether it was simply a matter of hygiene and appearance. Perhaps it was a little of both. The debate lingers like the scent in the air. Nearby, another ritual begins. After oiling, athletes often dust themselves lightly with fine sand. The sand clings, giving grip to slick skin, a practical countermeasure before wrestling or running. The result is almost artistic. Bodies painted in muted gold and tan, glistening like statues just stepped down from their pedestals. You imagine trying this routine at your local gym. First oil, then dust, then a jog on the treadmill. The front desk would probably hand you a mop. The courtyard hums with life as more citizens arrive. Some are younger, bright-eyed boys barely into adolescence, their voices cracking as they joke with each other. Others are older, seasoned men who move more slowly, their gestures practiced, economical. Everyone follows the same rhythm. Remove clothing, apply oil, dust with sand, stretch lazily beneath the sun. The sounds are gentle. The scrape of sandals against stone, the faint plop of oil poured from flasks, the rustle of hands smoothing across skin. Occasionally, someone sneezes as sand puffs upward, and the group laughs softly. You recall that quirky tidbit about sneezing during races. One city supposedly fined athletes for such interruptions. Perhaps here, too, the sneezer would earn mock penalties from his friends. You shift your weight. leaning against a column. The stone is cool beneath your back, a welcome contrast to the warm air. From this vantage, you see how the routine sets the tone for the day. This isn't frantic warm-up, not drills shouted by stern coaches. It's unhurried, almost ritualistic, a daily rhythm that blends practical necessity with calm social connection. A boy approaches the statue of Hermes, tapping his flask of oil against the pedestal before uncorking it. A small offering, maybe, or just a habit. He rubs the oil onto his arms while whispering something you can't hear. You imagine it's a prayer for speed, though perhaps he's just reminding himself not to slip on the track again. The scene settles into your senses, the gleam of oiled bodies, the dust rising in golden motes, the lazy chatter of men greeting friends. The smell of oil, warm and nutty, drifts with the faint scent of figs someone is nibbling. The morning air carries it all, wrapping you in a cocoon of routine. You could almost doze here, lulled by the rhythm of preparation. And you think, with a sleepy grin, that maybe the Greeks invented the world's first spa day, disguised as athletics. Oil, exfoliation, group bonding, wellness, 4th century BCE style. You settle into the shaded edge of the courtyard, eyes drifting over the scene that always provokes a little shock for the modern mind. The training begins in earnest, and everyone, without hesitation, has stripped down entirely. There is no hiding, no modesty, no locker room stalls or strategically draped towels. The gymnasium is, by design, a place of nudity. The word itself reminds you. Gymnos means naked in Greek. Gymnasium, quite literally, the naked place. You can almost hear your inner voice chuckling. Imagine the marketing disaster if a new fitness center opened in your neighborhood under that translation. But here, centuries ago, it was the most natural thing in the world. You watch as pairs of men begin their training, bodies shining faintly with oil and dusted with fine sand. They jog across the packed earth track, their limbs free, movements unencumbered. The lack of clothing makes sense in this hot climate. Fabric only clings with sweat, slows the body, or risks snagging in a grapple. Still, there's more here than practicality. The naked body is celebrated, idealized, even moralized. To train unclothed is to show that you have nothing to hide, that your body is as much a civic expression as your voice in the assembly. A few boys tease each other nervously, self-conscious in the way that adolescents always are. One runs awkwardly, holding his arms stiff, and a friend mocks him by mimicking the movement. Laughter ripples across the sand. The tension breaks and they relax. You smile. It's the same as any high school locker room banter today, just with fewer socks and more amphorae of oil. From nearby colonnades, a group of philosophers watches. One remarks that nudity reveals the truth of a man, both his strengths and his weaknesses. Another disagrees, muttering that the mind is the only thing worth displaying. Historians still argue whether the Greeks saw athletic nudity more as a spiritual act or simply a matter of tradition. As usual, the debate lingers unresolved, like incense smoke curling in still air. Your senses keep pulling you back to the details. The sand crunches softly beneath bare feet, a sound gentler than shoes on gravel. The sun warms shoulders, highlights muscles in golden glow. You feel almost hypnotized watching the steady rhythm of runners circling the track, their strides fluid, their breaths measured. The entire scene is slow, deliberate, not frantic. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Some Greek vase paintings show athletes wearing odd little caps or ribbons, the only items left on otherwise bare bodies. Scholars suggest these might have been protective headgear or just stylish accessories. Either way, it's a funny mental picture. A gym full of unclothed men, all proudly sporting tiny matching hats. You stroll along the edge of the track, observing. The athletes aren't just running aimlessly. Some practice short sprints, bursting forward in sudden speed. Others focus on long, steady laps, their faces calm, almost meditative. The running ground is marked by stone posts, smooth from countless hands brushing them during turns. You brush one yourself, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath your fingertips. Over in the wrestling pit, nudity changes the nature of combat. With no cloth to grip, every move relies on leverage, balance, and raw strength. Two men circle slowly, feet digging shallow grooves in the sand. One lunges, the other sidesteps, and their bodies lock in a twisting dance. The crowd cheers softly, a subdued appreciation rather than raucous yelling. The wrestlers strain, but the pace is measured, deliberate. You can almost imagine it as a sleepy sort of choreography, a duet in dust. You pause, realizing how normalized all of this must have been. No one here blushes or averts their eyes. Nudity is not exhibition, but expectation. It makes you think maybe the Greeks didn't just invent democracy and geometry, maybe they invented body positivity too. Granted, their version came with a few caveats. You had to be male, citizen, and accept the civic order. But still, the ease of it is strangely refreshing. As the training continues, the rhythms blur into a soothing pattern. Jogging footsteps, low murmurs, the occasional grunt of a wrestler thrown to the ground. The air smells faintly of oil, sweat, and warm stone. Shadows grow shorter as the sun climbs higher. You lean back against a column, the stone cool under your shoulders, and let the entire naked truth of the gymnasium wash over you. Calm, unapologetic, oddly serene. You linger under the shade of the colonnade, watching how the gymnasium is never just about bodies in motion. Along the edges of the courtyard, men cluster in small groups, their gestures animated, their voices rising and falling in rhythm with ideas rather than biceps. This is the philosopher's corner, though they hardly need a sign. You can tell by the way they walk slowly, scrolls tucked under their arms, as though exercise is something best left to other people. One group has drawn a modest crowd. A gray-bearded man with a pointed nose is lecturing on virtue, while a pair of younger athletes stand nearby, half listening as they rub oil across their shoulders. The body trains the mind, the philosopher insists. A strong body houses wisdom more securely. His rival, a wiry fellow with wild hair, interrupts. Nonsense. The body distracts from the soul. Sweat does not lead to philosophy, only to thirst. Their students nod solemnly, though you suspect half of them are more interested in the wrestling match behind the philosophers than the argument itself. The scene has that sleepy humor you've come to expect. One boy recites lines of Homer, struggling with the meter, while another tries to sneak a grape from his bag. The grape drops, rolling across the sand, and the philosopher stops mid-sentence, glaring at the interruption. You hide a grin. Even in ancient Athens, the classroom had class clowns. The gymnasium is unusual in how it combines worlds. It isn't just a sports field, it's also a school, a debate hall, and sometimes a stage for political gossip. You overhear two men murmuring about elections, their voices hushed as they eye the crowd. A candidate, they say, has been seen exercising daily, hoping to display his discipline. Historians still argue whether gymnasium appearances were political theater or genuine devotion to health. Perhaps both. One quirky tidbit you recall. Certain philosophers were notorious for joining athletic discussions, then promptly steering the topic toward abstract questions. A debate about sprinting speed might somehow become an argument about the nature of time itself. Imagine showing up for a workout, asking how to shave seconds off your mile, and leaving with homework on metaphysics. It's enough to make you nostalgic for modern gym trainers who only yell about form. You close your eyes a moment, letting the mixture of sounds seep in. The thud of a discus landing in sand, the melodic plucking of a lyre nearby, the measured cadence of someone quoting poetry, the low rumble of philosophical debate. It's a strange symphony, but somehow it blends into a lullaby. The gymnasium breathes like a living body, muscles flexing in one corner, thoughts sparking in another, laughter rippling softly between. As you open your eyes again, you notice a group of young men sprawled under the trees. They have finished their exercises and now listen to a teacher explaining the virtues of moderation. He uses an athlete's life as his metaphor. Too little exercise, and the body weakens. Too much, and the body collapses. Balance, he insists, is the secret. One boy yawns loudly, earning a light tap with a scroll. You chuckle softly. Philosophy has always been better than melatonin. The philosophers themselves aren't immune to the comedy of the scene. One adjusts his robe so dramatically that it falls off his shoulder, prompting an athlete to tease him about joining the naked ranks. The philosopher scoffs, claiming nudity is only for those who lack arguments. His rival immediately counters, and yet here you are, lacking both. Laughter rolls through the crowd. Still, there's depth beneath the humor. Gymnasiums weren't only for training bodies, they trained citizens. You sense it in the seriousness of certain conversations, the intent gazes of students trying to catch every word. In this place, politics, philosophy, and athletics swirl together until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. It's a civic soup, served daily with a side of olive oil. And as you lean against the column, the breeze carrying whispers of both sweat and syllogisms, you realize that in a Greek gymnasium, even arguments feel strangely calming. They're not urgent, not desperate, just steady voices floating through warm air, rising like smoke and then dissolving into nothing. You ease your way toward the far side of the complex where the sounds shift in tone. The quiet recitations and measured footsteps give way to sharper noises, feet scuffing in sand, low grunts, an occasional laugh cut off by a sudden thud. This is the wrestling area, the palestra, and it feels like the beating heart of the gymnasium. The ground here is softer, layered with fresh sand raked smooth earlier in the morning. You crouch to touch it, feeling how it clings faintly to your fingertips, dampened just enough to hold form. The sand isn't decorative. It cushions falls, absorbs sweat, and offers grip. The wrestlers circle barefoot, each step leaving shallow crescents in the surface. You watch those crescents overlap until the floor becomes a palimpsest of movements, a soft memory of the match already underway. Two youths step forward, their bodies still glistening faintly from oil and dust. They circle each other, eyes locked, shoulders rolling. The crowd nearby murmurs, not loudly, not like a stadium roar. This is a subdued, intimate audience. You lean closer, hearing the faint creak of tendons, the hiss of breath through clenched teeth. Suddenly, one feints left, then lunges right, and the two clash with a muffled smack of skin on skin. The grapple is slow, deliberate. No one's aiming for a knockout blow. Instead, it's about leverage, angles, balance. The wrestlers' bodies coil and twist, muscles standing out like sculpted marble. One attempts a hip throw, but the other shifts weight, countering by digging toes into sand. They stumble together, laugh briefly at the awkwardness, then reset their grips. It's oddly soothing, like watching a dance performed in slow motion. Each move predictable yet suspenseful. A trainer nearby calls out, his voice stern but measured. He corrects a stance, adjusts an elbow, insists on patience. You realize that in Greek wrestling, patience is as important as strength. Matches could last for hours, dragging on until exhaustion forced one opponent to yield. Historians still argue whether this form of wrestling was more about competition or about cultivating endurance and discipline. Either way, it's less about flashy throws and more about steady persistence. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some wrestlers, determined not to lose grip, covered their hands in fine dust or even rubbed ashes onto their palms. This made their holds stronger, but sometimes also earned them complaints from opponents who felt like they were being grabbed by sandpaper. Imagine shaking hands with one of them afterward. You'd probably want moisturizer. The wrestlers reset. This time, one succeeds, shifting his opponent's balance just enough to topple him into the sand. The fall is soft, more of a sigh than a crash. The victor helps his friend up immediately, both laughing as though the outcome mattered less than the performance. The crowd claps politely, the kind of applause you'd expect after someone plays a lullaby on the lyre, not after a competitive bout. You stand there, soaking it in. The air carries the musky scent of sweat mingled with olive oil, warmed by the sun. A breeze flicks through the colonnade, scattering dust motes that dance in the light. Somewhere nearby, a flute begins to play, oddly fitting background music for bodies entwined in slow struggle. The rhythm of breath, the crunch of sand, the occasional grunt, together it becomes hypnotic. Another pair steps forward. They're older, more deliberate, their movements slower but more controlled. They lock arms, press foreheads, sway gently like trees in a breeze. You almost forget they're wrestling at all, until one shifts suddenly and the other stumbles to one knee. The trainer nods approvingly, but his expression remains stern. Discipline. Always discipline. And you, watching, feel strangely relaxed. Wrestling here isn't violent spectacle, it's communal practice, almost ritual. The steadiness of it, the softness of the sand, the calm voices of spectators. It's less like a fight and more like meditation with occasional bruises. You lean back, closing your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds blur together. The gymnasium hums gently around you, a mix of exertion and ease. And you realize that even in struggle, even in competition, the Greeks found a rhythm that could lull you to sleep. You wander away from the wrestling pit, brushing sand from your fingers, and follow a path lined with plane trees. The murmur of voices fades into the steady rhythm of footsteps, and soon you find yourself standing beside the running track. It stretches long and straight, a ribbon of packed earth framed by stone markers. At either end, marble posts stand sentinel, worn smooth by decades of hands brushing against them during sharp turns. The air here feels different, lighter, charged with the anticipation of movement. A group of men line up casually at one end, bare feet shuffling, arms swinging lazily as they wait for a signal. There's no starting pistol, no buzzers or flashing lights. A trainer lifts his hand, pauses until silence ripples across the group, and then lets it drop. The runners launch forward with surprising grace, feet striking sand in near unison. You watch them sprint, their bodies leaning slightly forward, strides long and steady. The dust rises in soft clouds behind them, catching sunlight so it looks like they're kicking up golden mist. The sound is hypnotic. Thud, 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 steady as a heartbeat. One man pulls slightly ahead, his arms pumping with quiet determination, while another grins mischievously and swerves just enough to annoy his rival. Laughter ripples from the sidelines. The lap is short by modern standards, but the Greeks had variations. Some races tested explosive speed, others endurance. You imagine the tension of a long-distance run beneath this relentless sun. No shade, just sand, sweat, and the cheers of citizens leaning against the colonnades. Historians still argue whether the Greeks trained more for spectacle or for civic discipline. Were the races for fun or for forging unity in citizens? Perhaps both. At the far end, the runners slap the marble posts before wheeling around, sand spraying from their heels. The posts themselves are smooth, almost polished by time, as though the stone remembers every lap ever run. You trail your hand along one, feeling its coolness even in the heat. There's something calming about the repetition. Hands striking stone, footsteps pounding earth, breaths moving in sync. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some athletes practiced running while holding weights, little stone dumbbells called halteres. They'd swing them rhythmically, claiming it helped propel their bodies forward. Imagine jogging at your gym while clutching a pair of rocks, insisting it's peak science. Yet, surprisingly, modern trainers have admitted it may not have been entirely foolish. Another group takes their turn. These runners are slower, older men who jog in a cluster, chatting between breaths. They're not chasing speed records. They're here for ritual, for health, perhaps just for gossip with less dust than the marketplace. You can't help but think of the silver joggers in modern parks. Those cheerful retirees jogging in pairs, more focused on conversation than calories. Time collapses. Human habits remain. The spectators are as much a part of the scene as the athletes. A boy counts laps aloud, losing track and starting over. A philosopher wanders too close to the track, gesturing wildly during a lecture, only to be gently nudged back by a runner who nearly collides with him. The crowd laughs softly, shaking their heads. Even wisdom has to yield to momentum. You lean against a column, closing your eyes briefly, letting the rhythm carry you. The pounding of feet fades into a background hum, like the beating of rain on a roof. The sun warms your face, the breeze cools your neck, and for a moment you feel as though you too are running. Not straining, not racing, but gliding, steady and calm. Opening your eyes, you see the runners finish their laps, collapsing onto the sand with satisfied sighs. Their chests rise and fall in slow rhythm, breaths heavy but not frantic. A boy brings a flask of water, and they pass it around, each taking a sip. You imagine the salt of sweat mixing with the sweetness of cool water. A simple pleasure magnified in this setting. And as you stand there, watching dust settle slowly back to earth, you realize the running track isn't about who wins or loses. It's about rhythm, endurance, community. It's about showing up, circling again and again, until the body and mind hum together like a lullaby. You drift along the edge of the running track, the dust still clinging faintly to your toes, until the clang of stone against stone draws your attention. You turn, and there it is, the corner where weight training unfolds. No shiny chrome dumbbells, no machines with complicated pulleys, just men hefting chunks of carved stone, shaped with simple handles. These are the haltères, heavy yet elegantly curved, designed to rest easily in the hand. You pause to watch. One man grips a pair and swings them forward as he leaps down a sandy lane, landing with a grunt, the stones arcing like extensions of his arms. Others hold them steady, raising them in front of their chests, lowering them slowly, then repeating, their muscles trembling faintly. The haltères are crude compared to modern barbells, yet they serve the same purpose: building strength, testing balance, carving endurance. A younger boy picks up a pair clearly too heavy for him. He staggers sideways, nearly toppling, before laughing and dropping them with a dramatic thud. His friends cheer mockingly, calling him Hercules in training. He bows, grinning as though he intended the performance all along. You can't help but smile. It's the same bravado you see when a modern teenager loads a barbell with more plates than he can possibly lift, hoping to impress someone across the room. The trainers here are vigilant, correcting posture, encouraging patience. One places his hands on a boy's shoulders, guiding him into proper stance. Strength, he says, is not in rushing, but in repeating. The boy groans, muttering that repetition is boring. The trainer smirks. Boring is the secret. You chuckle softly at that. Ancient wisdom, or perhaps just a trainer trying to keep a student from pulling a muscle. The atmosphere in this corner is calmer than the wrestling pit, less noisy than the running track. It's steady, deliberate. The scrape of stone, the exhale of breath, the occasional grunt. These sounds repeat like a mantra. You lean against a column, letting the rhythm lull you. The haltères swing forward, pause midair, then fall back with soft thumps. Over and over. It's as hypnotic as watching waves roll onto a beach. Historians still argue whether halteres were truly used for weightlifting or primarily as aids for long jumpers. The athletes themselves probably didn't care what future scholars would say. For them, the stones were tools, simple, reliable, and endlessly repeatable. And repeat they did, until muscles ached and sweat beaded across foreheads. A quirky tidbit lingers in your thoughts. Some athletes supposedly used halteres to enhance rhythm in dancing drills, swinging them in time with flute music. Imagine a weightlifting Zumba class, stone dumbbells clattering in sync with a lyre. You grin at the mental image. It feels ridiculous, yet strangely plausible in this hybrid world of exercise and performance. As the sun climbs higher, shadows shorten. The men glisten with oil and sweat, their bodies moving with slow determination. One athlete pauses to wipe his forehead, leaving a streak of sand across his temple. Another collapses onto the ground, breathing heavily, staring at the sky as though it holds the secret to strength. His friend nudges him with a foot, teasing, "Done already. Even Hermes would laugh." The exhausted man waves lazily, muttering something about saving his energy for wine later. You crouch near the edge of the practice lane, scooping up a small pebble. It feels cool in your palm, its edges smoothed by countless years of feet brushing it aside. Around you, the repetition continues, steady and grounding. You realize the gymnasium isn't built for spectacle. It's built for rhythm, for showing up daily, moving slowly, steadily until the body adapts. The halteres swing again. The stones thud against sand. The air carries the faint tang of dust and olive oil. And you, watching from the sidelines, Feel the quiet calm of effort without hurry, of strength built not for glory, but for the gentle satisfaction of motion. You drift away from the steady rhythm of the halteres, following the sound of air slicing through space. The path opens onto a wide, sandy field, its edges marked by low stone benches where a few citizens sit lazily, shading their eyes with their hands. Here, the training shifts from grounded effort to something more aerial, the javelin and the discus. The javelins are simple, long, slender wooden shafts tipped with bronze. They rest in neat bundles against the wall, waiting to be chosen. One young athlete steps forward, grips a javelin, and balances it carefully along his forearm. He paces back, eyes narrowed. Then, with a sharp exhale, he lunges forward and hurls it into the sky. The shaft spins, slicing through the air with a faint hiss before sinking into the sandy pit ahead. Applause ripples softly, polite rather than roaring, as though the act were a graceful dance rather than a test of force. You step closer, noticing how calm the rhythm is. Athletes take turns without rushing. Each hurl feels like an exhalation, a sigh released into the open air. The thump of the javelin hitting earth is satisfying, solid yet muffled, like a heartbeat against sand. You can almost feel the vibration in your chest. A trainer corrects a boy's grip, adjusting the leather thong wrapped around the shaft. The boy rolls his eyes but obeys. When he finally throws, the javelin arcs beautifully but lands short. His friends cheer anyway, teasing him that he'll be ready for Sparta in another decade. He bows theatrically, earning laughter. You smile. It's the same vibe as a modern friend group clapping exaggeratedly for someone who barely hits the dartboard. Not far away, another group practices with the discus. Smooth stone discs glint in the sunlight, their edges worn by countless throws. One man steps into the circle, rocking gently from foot to foot, holding the disc flat against his palm. He spins slowly, then releases, the disc flying in a lazy arc, gleaming against the sky before dropping into the pit with a heavy thud. The crowd claps softly again, nodding appreciatively as if they'd just witnessed a poem recited correctly. Historians still argue whether the discus was meant purely as sport or whether it had ritual ties, perhaps echoing the circular motions of the heavens. To the athletes, though, it seems like a simple joy, hurling stone, watching it fly, measuring distance in the sand. You recall a quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources mention athletes who polish their discs with oil, claiming it improved aerodynamics. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern physics teacher. I swear, sir, the olive oil makes it faster. Whether it worked or not, the discs glistened handsomely in the sun, and perhaps that was reason enough. As you stand in the shade, you feel lulled by the rhythm. Pick up, pace back, throw. Retrieve, dust off, try again. The routine stretches into a slow loop, like waves breaking on a beach. The air smells faintly of dust and bronze warmed by the sun. The faint wind whistles past as each javelin cuts through it, adding to the sleepy soundtrack. One athlete, clearly tired, sits on the ground with his discus propped on his knee. He traces circles in the sand absent-mindedly, lost in thought. You wonder if he's contemplating geometry, or simply what's for dinner. Either way, his stillness balances the motion around him, adding to the strange harmony of the scene. The spectators remain calm, too. A few older men lean on canes, nodding approvingly at each throw, occasionally debating which technique is superior. Their voices are slow, measured, almost soothing. They could argue for hours without raising their tones. It's less about proving a point and more about savoring conversation itself. The sun glints off the discs. Dust swirls softly with each landing, and the javelins stand upright in the sand like a small forest of spears. You breathe it all in, the arcs, the thuds, the laughter, the patience. The field feels timeless, suspended between exertion and repose, and as you lean back against the stone bench, you can't help but think that this, too, is less about glory and more about rhythm. A gentle cycle of flight and fall that mirrors your own steady drift into calm. You wander away from the javelins and discs, your ears still echoing with their muted thuds, and follow a trail of warmth and vapor. The air shifts subtly, cool dust giving way to rising heat, the faint scent of mineral water drifting toward you. It draws you like a beacon until, around a corner, you come upon the bathhouse that crowns the gymnasium. At first glance, it's unassuming. Low walls, shaded colonnades, a doorway open to let steam curl lazily outward. But step closer, and you feel the temperature change. Warm, damp air brushing your face, carrying whispers of relaxation. A group of weary athletes pads inside, laughing softly. Their training complete for now. You follow in their wake, the stone beneath your feet slightly slick from condensation. Inside, the light is dimmer. Steam hangs thick, turning the outlines of men into silhouettes. You hear voices echo off wet walls, their tones lower, mellower than the lively chatter outside. The bathhouse isn't about spectacle or competition, it's about unwinding, surrendering to calm. Pools of different temperatures line the chamber, one tepid, one warm, one cooler for those brave enough to dunk after heat. An athlete eases himself into the warm pool with a long sigh, his body sinking until only his head rests above the surface. Another sits on the edge, dangling feet lazily while chatting with a friend submerged up to the neck. Their conversation drifts from today's training to what they plan to eat later: barley bread, olives, perhaps figs if the market is generous. It's mundane, soothing, human. You lower yourself onto a bench at the side, the stone warm against your legs. The sounds lull you, the plip of water dripping steadily from a spout, the faint slap of hands on wet skin, the quiet cadence of voices softened by steam. It's easy to see how athletes could linger here long after practice, melting into the atmosphere. Historians still argue whether these baths were strictly for hygiene or carried ritual importance. Some point to shrines often tucked nearby, suggesting that cleansing the body was tied to cleansing the spirit. Others argue it was simply practical. Sand and oil cling stubbornly, and sweat leaves no one charming. Perhaps, as with so much in Greek life, it was both, a physical necessity elevated into tradition. You remember a quirky tidbit. Some athletes added herbs to the water, sprigs of thyme or rosemary, claiming they eased sore muscles. Imagine stepping into a giant pot of ancient herbal tea. Your body simmering gently until relaxation infuses your bones. The image makes you chuckle softly, though you wouldn't mind trying it yourself. The room fills slowly with more citizens, some stretching their limbs beneath the water, others reclining on benches as attendants ladle warm water over their shoulders. The attendants move quietly, their motions practiced, scraping away layers of sand with strigils, rubbing oil into tired muscles. You can almost feel the sensation. The drag of bronze across your back, the relief as sweat and dust slip away, leaving skin cool and refreshed. The steam blurs edges of the chamber until everything looks softened, dreamlike. Shadows melt into mist. Voices echo like whispers in a cave. Water ripples endlessly. You close your eyes, inhaling the mingled scents of olive oil, warm stone, and faint herbs. It feels like the entire gymnasium is exhaling, winding down, surrendering to calm. A boy splashes noisily, earning a stern glance from a trainer. The boy shrinks, then grins sheepishly, the way children always do when they know they've pushed just far enough. The tension dissolves in laughter, and the splash echoes again, softer, more playful this time. Even discipline, it seems, bends gently in the bathhouse. You sit there longer, your body slackening just by imagining the warmth seeping into your muscles. The voices fade into murmurs. The water laps steadily, and you realize this chamber is as essential to the gymnasium as the track or the wrestling pit. Here, effort dissolves into ease, turning sweat into serenity. The steam from the bathhouse still clings to your skin as you step into the adjoining chamber, where another ritual unfolds. One less about soaking and more about scraping. Here, the athletes gather with their jars of oil and their simple but ingenious tools. Bronze strigils, curved like small sickles but with smooth edges. The process begins with oiling again, but this time it's not for performance. Men pour fresh olive oil into their palms, rubbing it across arms, legs, shoulders. The oil glistens under lamplight, catching golden highlights on skin. Once coated, they reach for the strigil. With slow, steady strokes, they scrape along the body, dragging away not just the oil but also the sweat, dust, and grit from the day's exercise. The sound is faint, a soft rasp, rhythmic and strangely satisfying. You watch one man methodically scrape his forearm, then flick the residue into a shallow basin. Another scrapes down his back with practiced ease, though a friend offers to reach the places he can't. They laugh as the friend exaggerates the motion, pretending to harvest olives rather than clean a shoulder. The room hums with gentle camaraderie, punctuated by chuckles and sighs of relief. The strigil ritual is oddly hypnotic. Each stroke is deliberate, unhurried. You lean closer, noticing how the bronze glides, leaving skin faintly reddened but clean. The mixture of oil, sweat, and dust gathers in bowls, a kind of thick, earthy paste. Quirky tidbit: some sources suggest this mixture, called gloios, was collected and even sold as a kind of medicine, believed to cure ailments. Imagine rubbing second-hand athlete goo on your sore knee, convinced it's a miracle balm. The thought makes you smirk, though you can't deny someone probably swore by it. Attendants help in the ritual too. They move with efficiency, scraping backs, arms, and calves, then massaging more oil into tired muscles. The atmosphere is more intimate than competitive. Here, no one strains or grunts. They simply surrender to the rhythm of scraping, as though each stroke peels away the day's exertion. Historians still argue whether the practice was mainly hygienic or symbolic. Was it purely about removing grime, or did it represent cleansing the spirit after sweat and strain? As you watch the steam rise, blurring the edges of the room, you suspect both are true. It feels ritualistic, almost sacred in its repetition. A boy mutters that he hates the strigil. It feels scratchy on his skin. His elder rolls his eyes, declaring him soft as cheese. The others laugh, and the boy, embarrassed, presses harder with the tool, determined to show he isn't weak. You smile. Every generation has its reluctant participants in hygiene. The smells here are distinctive: warm oil, metallic bronze, faint incense from a corner shrine. The mingling scents create an atmosphere that's strangely soothing, like a spa crossed with a forge. You close your eyes and let the rasp of strigils wash over you like waves on a shore. A philosopher wanders in, robes fluttering, holding a scroll. He begins explaining that scraping the body is an allegory for cleansing the soul of vice. His lecture is met with groans from athletes who only want their shoulders massaged. One mutters, "The only vice I have is too much dust," and the room breaks into laughter. Still, the philosopher continues, undeterred, his words mixing with the rasp of bronze in a sleepy symphony. You lean back against the wall, feeling warmth radiate through stone, and let your thoughts drift. The strigil strokes blend into a hypnotic rhythm, steady and unbroken. Oil glides, bronze scrapes, voices murmur, and, for a moment, the entire chamber feels suspended in time, an endless cycle of effort, cleansing, and calm. You linger a while longer in the steamy calm of the strigil chamber, but soon your attention drifts to the figures who keep all of this moving with quiet authority. The trainers, the pied otrubi. Their presence is everywhere, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp. They aren't the ones panting on the sand or straining with halteres, but their eyes scan constantly, measuring posture, pace, and discipline. You notice one standing near the wrestling pit, arms folded, brows knit in permanent concentration. He doesn't shout, doesn't wave his arms dramatically. Instead, he steps forward, nudges a boy's elbow upward, presses his hand lightly on a shoulder, and then steps back again. The adjustment is small, but the difference shows immediately. The boy's stance steadies. His balance holds firmer. The trainer nods once, satisfied, before pacing away. His silence speaks louder than 100 whistles. Another trainer, older and rounder, seems almost kindly. He encourages rather than scolds, clapping a hand on a young man's back after a well-thrown discus. Good, good. Now again, and again, and again. The repetition makes the athlete groan, but he complies, muttering that he'll be throwing discs in his dreams. You smirk, maybe that's the point. Repetition until skill becomes second nature, as natural as breathing. The pied otrubi weren't just physical coaches. Many doubled as moral instructors, teaching discipline, moderation, and self-control. You overhear one explaining that too much indulgence in food or wine ruins the balance of the body. Another insists that arrogance on the track is worse than stumbling on it. Historians still argue whether these lectures were genuinely philosophical or simply stern pep talks dressed in fancy words. Either way, the lesson sinks in. A quirky tidbit floats to your mind. Some trainers were notorious for carrying small sticks or straps, used not cruelly but as reminders. A light tap on the calf if a runner's stride grew lazy, a flick on the wrist if someone slouched. Imagine your modern gym instructor standing behind you with a stick, prodding you whenever your form wobbles. You'd probably switch gyms, but here it was accepted, even expected. You notice how the athletes respond. They don't resent the corrections. In fact, some seem eager to receive them, stepping forward with hopeful eyes, waiting for the trainer's nod or tap of approval. It's not about fear. It's about trust. The pied otrubi embody the tradition of the gymnasium itself. Steady, guiding, patient. The atmosphere around them is oddly soothing. Their voices are calm, their movements deliberate. They don't rush, don't bark frantic orders. Everything flows at the pace of the sun. Steady, unhurried, rhythmic. You lean against a column and watch one trainer walk slowly across the track, sandals scraping softly. He pauses by a group of boys running laps, counts their strides silently, then tells them to ease their breathing, to let motion find its own rhythm. The boys nod, adjusting, their footsteps falling into smoother unison. One trainer sits cross-legged beneath a tree, a scroll unrolled on his lap. He's half philosopher, half coach, reciting lines from Hesiod between instructions. Work brings honor, he intones, but rest preserves the work. The athletes glance at him, half confused, half amused, before dutifully stretching. You chuckle. Imagine your personal trainer quoting poetry while spotting your bench press. Unlikely, but oddly charming. As the day drifts on, the trainers move like shadows across the complex. They're everywhere yet nowhere, correcting here, encouraging there, never raising the tempo beyond calm necessity. You realize that their greatest contribution isn't teaching someone how to throw farther or run faster. It's teaching them to belong to the rhythm of the gymnasium itself, to flow with its cycles of exertion and ease. The sun filters through plane trees, casting dappled light across the sand where trainers and students move together in quiet harmony. Oil glistens on skin, strigils scrape softly in the distance, voices murmur under the colonnades. And you, watching, feel lulled by the presence of these steady guides, the calm anchors in a world of sweat and dust. You follow the slow shuffle of sandals into another corner of the gymnasium, where the variety of ages strikes you immediately. Here, youths barely into adolescence stretch beside men with graying hair, their bodies lean but no longer as swift. The gymnasium, you realize, isn't a place reserved for a narrow slice of society. It is a civic space where multiple generations mingle, share, and learn together. At one end, a cluster of boys giggles as they attempt to mimic the stance of an older wrestler. They exaggerate his crouch, wobble unsteadily, and topple into each other with bursts of laughter. The elder, far from annoyed, shakes his head with a smile and adjusts their posture with a gentle hand on the shoulder. Balance first, he murmurs. Strength later. His voice is soft but steady, and the boys straighten with renewed seriousness, eager to imitate correctly. Nearby, a man, perhaps in his 40s, demonstrates the long jump with halteres. His form is practiced, fluid, each swing of the stone weights propelling him through the air. A young teen watches closely, eyes wide. When it's his turn, the boy hesitates, clutching the halteres too tightly. The older man encourages him. Relax the grip, let the stones carry you forward. The boy tries again, lands with a stumble but beams proudly nonetheless. His mentor claps him on the back. The shared satisfaction warms the entire group. The intermingling is striking. Unlike modern gyms where ages often segregate, kids in youth programs, older adults in quiet corners, here it's all woven together. Generations pass down technique, humor, and habits. You can almost feel knowledge sliding along invisible threads, from elder to youth, like an unbroken chain. Historians still argue whether boys trained alongside adults at all times, or whether certain sections of the gymnasium were reserved by age. Some suggest there were designated hours. Others claim the mingling was constant. As you watch, you find it hard to imagine separation. The flow of ages feels too natural, too seamless. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some accounts describe boys practicing, while older men shouted encouragement, or criticism, from the sidelines, turning the session into a mix of exercise and comedy. Imagine trying to focus on your push-ups while your grandfather heckles you about your form. The scene here carries that same flavor, gentle teasing mixed with genuine guidance. You stroll closer, noticing how different generations use the gymnasium differently. The young leap, sprint, and wrestle with energy to spare, their laughter quick and loud. The elders move slower, focusing on stretching, measured lifting, or quiet walks around the track. Yet both groups converge during rests, sitting side by side under plane trees, sharing fruit, water, and stories. One boy, no older than 12, frowns as he tries to recite a line of Homer, stumbling over the dactylic hexameter. An older man, patient and calm, repeats it slowly, guiding the boy through the rhythm until the words come smoother. The boy grins, triumphant, and the elder nods. In this place, even literature is shared across ages, binding them as surely as any athletic drill. The air hums with these exchanges, soft voices correcting, bursts of laughter at clumsy attempts, murmured advice repeated like lullabies. You lean back against a column, listening. The gymnasium is less a school of competition and more a family sprawling across the generations. Its rhythm is inclusive, absorbing youthful energy and elder wisdom alike, blending them into one sleepy harmony. The light shifts again as the sun arcs higher. Shadows shorten, faces glisten with sweat, and everywhere you look, knowledge flows. A grandfather pats a boy's head. A teenager laughs with his mentor. An elder stretches slowly with the patience of years. And you, standing among them, feel how the gymnasium's heartbeat is communal, an intergenerational lullaby of bodies in motion and voices in calm conversation. The steady murmur of voices carries you deeper into the colonnades, and soon you find yourself in a quieter hall, where the rhythm of training shifts into something less physical. Here, the gymnasium reveals another face. It is also a school. Rows of young men sit cross-legged on reed mats, scrolls resting on their laps or simply lines etched faintly into memory. Their voices rise together in halting chorus, reciting Homer, Hesiod, sometimes fragments of lyric poetry. The air is calmer here, cooler in the shade, and the sound of chanting blends into a low, droning hum. One boy stumbles over a word, and his neighbor nudges him with an elbow. Grinning. The instructor, a stern man with ink-stained fingers, clears his throat sharply. The chatter dies, replaced with renewed focus. It's not far from the atmosphere of a modern classroom, the same shuffle of restless students, the same occasional sighs when lessons stretch too long. You lean against a column, listening. A line from the Iliad echoes through the hall, the words steady but tired. The instructor pauses to explain a phrase, his voice softening as he gestures toward the track outside. As Achilles runs, he says, so must you run, but not only with your legs, with your mind. The boys nod solemnly. Though you catch one yawning behind his hand. You smile. Every age produces its reluctant scholars. Historians still argue how much formal schooling happened inside gymnasiums. Some claim they were primarily for athletics, with education limited to philosophy and casual debate. Others insist they were integrated schools, where literacy and physical training were inseparable. Watching the scene before you, you feel both might be true. The physical and the intellectual hum side by side, like two instruments playing different notes in the same lullaby. You recall a quirky tidbit. Some teachers used physical activity as punishment for poor recitation. Extra laps around the track, or holding a wrestling stance until legs trembled. Imagine stumbling over a line of Homer and being told to plank for 10 minutes. It sounds oddly familiar, as if the modern gym teacher and the ancient instructor were cousins across time. The hall is not silent, though. Outside, you still hear the thud of feet on the running track, the rasp of strigils scraping oil. The two worlds bleed together, physical exertion outside, intellectual exertion inside. One boy tries to keep rhythm with both, chanting lines while bouncing a discus gently against the floor. His teacher glares, confiscates the discus, and sets it beside his scroll. The boy sulks, earning smirks from his friends. As you move slowly through the rows, you notice details. Sandals lined neatly by the wall, scrolls tied with leather thongs, a clay lamp flickering faintly in the corner. The faint scent of ink mingles with olive oil and dust. You imagine the feel of parchment under fingertips, rough but pliable, covered in neat handwritten lines. The atmosphere here is not harsh but steady, much like the trainers outside. Lessons aren't barked, they're repeated, coaxed, corrected until memory holds. It's a rhythm of words instead of muscles, and as the voices chant again, low, monotonous, endless, you feel your own eyelids grow heavy. It is less like a lecture and more like a lullaby woven from ancient poetry. A boy at the back mutters that he'd rather be running. Another says he'd rather be napping. The instructor sighs, exasperated, then reminds them both that heroes of old did both, fought and learned, ran and sang. His words hang in the air, solemn, though a faint smile tugs at the corner of his mouth. He knows his students well. The sun slants through the colonnade, lighting the scrolls with golden glow. Outside, the gymnasium hums on. Inside, the hall drones with Homeric verses, and you, caught between worlds, feel lulled by the balance of sweat and syllable, of dust and poetry, of body and mind held together under one roof. You drift further along the shaded walkway, the murmur of recited poetry fading behind you, until another sound begins to rise. Soft notes carried on the breeze, light as falling leaves. It's music, not grand or ceremonial, but simple melodies played on flutes and lyres. You follow the sound into a small court where athletes, their training done for the moment, sit cross-legged with instruments resting across their laps. A boy plucks tentatively at a lyre, his fingers uncertain, the string buzzing with a sour note. His companion laughs gently, correcting the pitch by tightening the string. Together they play a few measures. The tune halting but earnest. Nearby, another pair practices on pipes, breath flowing into reeds that whistle softly. The sounds overlap, imperfect yet strangely soothing, like wind whispering through reeds by a riverbank. The link between music and the gymnasium may surprise you, but here it is as natural as sand underfoot. The Greeks saw harmony in all things, body, mind, and song. To train without rhythm was incomplete, they believed. So after the sweat of running, after the dust of wrestling, came the gentler exercise of plucking strings, shaping breath into notes. Historians still argue whether this practice was formal education or simply pastime encouraged by custom. But as you listen, the debate hardly matters. The result is calm, measured, and strangely lulling. A quirky tidbit floats up. In some contests, athletes performed dances or rhythmic drills set to flute accompaniment, blending physical and musical discipline. Imagine your gym introducing required recorder practice between sets of squats. The image makes you chuckle, but here it feels seamless, as though music is just another stretch of the body, another way to balance exertion with grace. You watch as one man hums softly while strumming his lyre, the melody drifting out into the courtyard where runners still jog their laps. The rhythm of footsteps begins to fall in sync with the music, almost unconsciously. One runner notices, exaggerates his pace to match the beat, and his friends laugh, calling him a show-off. Yet soon they all fall into rhythm, their strides turning into a kind of choreography. The setting deepens your drowsy calm. The sun dips lower, shadows lengthening across the court. The notes of music blur with the soft scrape of sandals, with distant voices murmuring under colonnades. The air smells faintly of warmed wood from the lyres, mixed with olive oil still clinging to skin. One boy fumbles his tune again, groaning loudly. His instructor shakes his head, muttering that Homer himself sang to a lyre, and if the boy wants to be remembered, he must at least manage a scale. The boy replies that he'd rather be remembered for throwing discus farther than anyone else. The room chuckles, the moment diffused. Music isn't about perfection here. It's about rhythm, patience, and the slow weaving of body and mind. You lean against a cool column, closing your eyes for a moment. The flute drifts like wind through tall grass. The lyre hums like bees around blossoms. Voices murmur between notes. Together, they form a lullaby so natural, it's as if the gymnasium itself is exhaling in melody. You could fall asleep here, lulled by strings and breath, soothed by the union of exertion and harmony. When you open your eyes again, the players are still at it. Tentative, steady, unhurried. The music doesn't demand attention. It simply drifts, like leaves across water. And you realize this, too, is training. Not of muscles or memory, but of rhythm, balance, and patience. The harmony of music and motion, dust and melody, oil and string. You leave the faint strumming of lyres behind and follow the hum of voices that seem to swell like bees in a hive. It draws you into one of the broad colonnades, where benches are scattered beneath the shade. Here, the gymnasium feels less like a training ground, and more like a cafe without the coffee, an open-air lounge where gossip, jokes, and politics weave into the fabric of daily life. Small groups huddle together. One cluster debates the price of figs in the market, insisting last year's harvest was sweeter. Another whispers about a local magistrate's new hairstyle, rolling their eyes at his vanity. A group of younger men exchange exaggerated stories about their training, each claiming to have run faster or wrestled harder than the other. The laughter is infectious, mellow, and easy. The atmosphere is playful. An older man tells a joke about a philosopher who spent so long debating whether motion exists that he forgot to leave the gymnasium. His listeners chuckle, shaking their heads knowingly. You smile. It's not far from the modern office joke about endless meetings that resolve nothing. Human humor doesn't change much, only the setting. A boy runs by breathless, announcing that someone just threw a discus farther than the distance between two fig stalls in the agora. His comparison earns hoots of laughter. One man replies that if distance were measured in fruit stands, he'd have been a champion long ago. The colonnade fills with easy banter, like waves breaking gently against stone. Historians still argue how central gossip and social chatter were in gymnasiums. Were they truly places of civic discourse, or just the ancient version of a coffee shop where half the talk was nonsense? The truth probably lies in between. Here, you hear both. serious murmurs about city politics, and silly jokes about sandal straps snapping mid-run. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. Some accounts describe gymnasiums as so popular for chatter that officials worried more about idle gossip than actual training. Imagine civic leaders grumbling that citizens spent more time lounging and laughing than throwing javelins. The thought makes you grin. The eternal battle between productivity and leisure. You watch as a young man leans in, whispering conspiratorially to his friends. Their eyes widen, then they all laugh, slapping their knees. You'll never know the details, but the rhythm of their laughter is more important than the story itself. Another group nearby sings a mocking rhyme about a rival city's athletes, their voices playful rather than cruel. The rhyme catches on, and soon the colonnade hums with the chorus, rising and fading like cicadas in summer. The energy here is different from the training grounds. Less focused, more meandering, yet it's no less essential. The gymnasium is as much about belonging as it is about brawn. These conversations, drifting lazily between benches and pillars, are the glue of civic life. The air carries the smells of sweat softened by oil, figs sweetening in baskets, and the faint sharpness of wine diluted with water. Someone pours a small libation onto the ground in thanks to Hermes, then goes back to his story. You notice how casual the rituals are here, woven seamlessly into conversation, never interrupting the flow. As you lean against a pillar, you feel the murmur sink into you. Voices overlap, laughter rises and falls. Sandals scrape gently across the floor as men shift and wander. Nothing urgent, nothing loud. Just the soft symphony of a community at ease. Your eyes drift closed for a moment. The rhythm of gossip and laughter becomes a lullaby, the cadence of a society exhaling together. When you open them again, the groups are still there, still laughing, still murmuring, still weaving the threads of daily life. And you realize that this side of the gymnasium, the chatter, the banter, the gossip, is as central as any discus or strigil. It's the heartbeat of ordinary humanity, steady and soothing. You drift toward a quieter corner of the complex where a notice board, wax tablets neatly pegged beneath a little awning, lists dates, names, and distances, all in tidy script. The mood here is different, focused, anticipatory. Men speak in lower voices, eyes bright with the kind of excitement that hides under calm faces. Festivals are coming, the great Pan-Hellenic Games rolling around like migrating seasons. Olympia, Delphi for the Pythian Games, the Isthmian near Corinth, and Nemea tucked among its dark pines. The gymnasium, drowsy most days, wakes just a little when a festival draws near, like a cat that hears the pantry door. You slide into the shade and watch the preparations. Runners trace measured intervals on the track, counting under their breath as though the numbers were prayers. Wrestlers go through holds slowly, almost ceremonially. Grip, shift, lift, set down, then stand apart and breathe as if gathering patience like another muscle. The discus throwers work from marks scratched with a stick, repeating the turn until the arc of the arm is as predictable as the solstice. They don't hurry. No one hurries. Training, like sleep, obeys a rhythm. You can't bully it. A group huddles around a trainer who taps a route on a map. Roads threading toward the sanctuary, rivers to ford, inns to avoid. We leave before dawn, he says, so the sun is on our backs. You imagine the caravan of athletes moving through olive groves, sandals whispering, halteres wrapped in cloth, javelins bundled like a traveling thicket. Someone jokes that if anyone sneezes en route, they owe everyone a fig. Laughter stirs the leaves. You remember the rumor about sneezing fines on the track and smile. Some penalties, it seems, travel well. The gymnasium carries a hush of reverence in these days before departure. Shrines get fresh garlands. The bronze of Hermes gleams where someone has polished it with oil-dark fingertips. A boy ties a ribbon around the base of the statue and pats it twice, the way you might tap a doorway for luck. Another pours a thimble of wine into the earth and whispers something that sounds like feet swift, breath steady. Historians still argue whether athletes believed the gods shaped outcomes, or whether these little rituals kept nerves from gnawing at resolve. Perhaps the gods and the nerves shared custody. You drift with a group toward the wrestling pit where a quiet trial unfolds. Two hopefuls meet, lock, and test each other like oaks in a slow wind. They're not trying to win so much as to reveal. A trainer watches, head tilted. After a time, he nods at one, gestures to the other, and says only, "Next year." The refused youth bows with surprising calm, then helps his opponent brush sand from his shoulders. The gesture is small, almost nothing, but it fills the space like a deep breath. You feel it in your chest, the way acceptance can be as disciplined as victory. Closer to the baths, men pack travel kits, flasks of oil, strigils, a spare ribbon, dried bread, and olives wrapped in linen. One tucks a little flute under his belt, insisting it keeps cadence on long roads. His friend claims he'll confiscate it if the tunes become too cheerful before coffee, if either coffee or confiscation existed here. So he settles for, "Before I've had my barley mush." You smirk. Pre-breakfast grumpiness is older than pottery. A herald arrives to practice announcements, voice rolling like thunder through the colonnade. He booms the names of events: Stadion, Dialos, Pale, Discos, and the words tremble in the timbers. You imagine thousands gathered under soft dust and glaring sun, the sanctuary ringing with a chorus of cities, the air thick with roasted barley and crushed laurel. The idea makes your skin prickle in the gentlest way, like a breeze across warm water. You think of Olympia itself, that grove of Altis where oaks and olives watched centuries of footsteps. A mainstream truth settles comfortably in your mind. The Olympic Games were sacred to Zeus, drawing athletes from across the Greek world. A truce declared so competitors could travel in safety. The notion that war paused so bodies could run, in sand, under sky, feels like a lullaby hummed by a stern god who, for once, says, "Rest." A quirky tidbit tickles the edge of your memory. Some competitors rubbed themselves with peculiar concoctions for luck: herb-steeped oils, a swipe of ash from a particular altar, or even, whispered with a grin, a touch of victory dust, scrounged from the heel marks of last year's champion. Whether placebo or poetry, the mix seems to matter less than the ritual of applying it carefully, as if painting courage onto the skin. The trainers keep the atmosphere gentle. "Sleep," one advises, as though gifting a secret. And in the morning, nothing new, only what your body already knows. Another adds, "Eat lightly, breathe deeply, and remember your first steps on the track at home." The counsel is a blanket of words. You pull it over your shoulders in imagination and feel the room itself soften. Among the notations on the wax tablets, you notice small circles, a private code for who will also compete in the musical contests that accompany certain games. The idea pleases you. The same man who throws a discus may sing a hymn. The runner who devours distance may pluck a lyre near the altar. Historians still argue whether this integration was common in every period or shone brighter in particular sanctuaries. But here, on the eve of departure, the companionship of art and athletics feels as natural as breath-meeting stride. A tailor, really just a deft-fingered neighbor, fits someone's head with a ribbon that won't slide during a sprint. "Tighter," the sprinter says. "Looser," his friend advises. "Perfect," the tailor declares, which is of course what tailors declare right before the first turn proves them wrong. Everyone laughs. You picture the ribbon pinging off mid-race like a startled bird, and the thought makes your shoulders shake quietly. Evening sidles in. Lamps bloom along the colonnades, round pools of honeyed light on stone. The practice grounds empty one by one. The last discus thudding softly, the final footfall skimming the track. Someone sweeps the sand smooth again, a soothing gesture like tucking in a bed. The statue of Hermes catches firelight and seems to wink. You decide not to investigate that too closely. Before sleep, the contingent gathers for a small rite. No trumpets, just murmurs. A prayer for safe travel, for honest judges, for ankles that behave. Oil flickers in shallow lamps, the scent pure and nutty. Your mouth tastes faintly of dust and something sweet. Maybe hope, if hope had a flavor. You're not even competing, and yet your chest rises with theirs. The way lungs learn to breathe together when a room shares a wish. When at last the gymnasium settles, the night is gentle. You hear the tiny lick of wind through plane leaves, the diminishing echo of a laugh from the gate, the soft clink of halteres being stacked for morning. You think about a road curving toward a grove, about white dust blooming under thousands of feet, about laurels cut with a crisp snap. And you realize that in this world, preparing for a festival is less a build to frenzy and more a slow exhale toward readiness. You yawn, sympathetic, and imagine walking with them at dawn. Sandals tapping time, travel packs shifting, a flute piping something small and brave. The city will recede, the sanctuary will rise, and in the hush before the first race, oil will gleam like morning on a pond. If ever there was a lullaby written in footprints, it is this: the measured way a people moves toward its sacred games, not to shatter silence, but to let it ring. You linger in the warm dusk of the gymnasium, but now your eyes wander toward the men in fine cloaks, the ones who don't sweat, don't scrape oil, don't lift stones. They are the civic officials, the wealthy patrons, the benefactors who ensure the marble doesn't crumble and the fountains don't run dry. Their presence isn't loud. They don't need to be. Their sandals are polished, their voices measured, their attention fixed on the gymnasium's image as much as its function. One official stands near a cracked column base, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He gestures, and a scribe scribbles on a wax tablet. Repairs must be ordered, funds allocated, workers summoned. Another walks slowly around the track, noting where the sand has grown thin, muttering about the need for more cartloads delivered before the festival season. You smile, realizing this is the ancient version of gym maintenance. Instead of someone complaining that the treadmill's broken, it's a magistrate worrying that the wrestling pit lacks proper sand. The gymnasium is more than a place to sweat. It's a symbol of the city's pride. Citizens from other poleis will visit, ambassadors will pass through, athletes will arrive for competitions. The condition of the gymnasium reflects the condition of the city itself. A crumbling colonnade is more than a structural flaw. It's a stain on civic reputation. Historians still argue whether wealthy patrons funded repairs out of genuine generosity or as a way to polish their political ambitions. You overhear one man boasting softly that his donation to resurface the running track was a gift to the youth of the city. His friend, smirking, mutters that it's also a gift to his campaign for magistracy next year. Perhaps both are true. The gymnasium doesn't mind. It gleams brighter either way. A quirky tidbit drifts into memory. Some benefactors had their names carved into stone benches or inscribed near fountains, immortalizing their generosity. Imagine squatting on a bench forever labeled, "Donated by Aristarchus, 322 BCE." You chuckle. Civic pride has always loved a little self-advertisement. As you walk, you notice repairs already underway. Masons chip at cracked marble, their tools tapping softly, a lullaby of stone. The rhythm is steady, unhurried. Dust drifts through shafts of light like golden smoke. A boy carries water to the workers, who pause gratefully, sipping before returning to their chisels. Even maintenance carries its own quiet cadence here. You pause near a fountain, its water flowing gently into a shallow basin. A civic patron has recently refurbished it, and the marble gleams whiter than its neighbors. Children splash their hands in it, laughing softly. The fountain bears an inscription praising both the gods and the donor. You trace the letters with your fingertips, cool and crisp, imagining how many generations will do the same. The gymnasium hums with pride tonight. Lamps flicker along the colonnades, illuminating the repaired walls, the polished statues, the freshly swept courtyards. Officials stroll slowly, inspecting, nodding, satisfied that their city looks strong, civilized, worthy of admiration. Their pride is not frantic, it's steady, like the rhythm of footsteps echoing in stone halls. You lean back, breathing in the mingled scents of oil, whetstone, and faint incense drifting from shrines. Around you, citizens mingle, proud of the space they've built together. There is a sense of belonging here, a communal glow. Even the tired athletes, their bodies sore, look at the polished marble with faint smiles, knowing their sweat contributes to something larger than themselves. As you close your eyes, you feel that pride settling into you too. Not loud or boastful, but calm, steady, like a lamp burning in the night. An assurance that the city cares for its people, and that the gymnasium, with its dust and laughter and marble, will endure. The murmur of civic pride fades as you notice something tucked into the quiet corners of the gymnasium. Small shrines, modest but unmistakable. They aren't grand temples with soaring columns, but niches in the walls, little stone altars beneath shady trees, or weathered statues standing sentinel in quiet alcoves. Religion, it seems, threads gently through the daily rhythm of exercise. The most common figure you find here is Hermes, patron of athletes, messengers, and mischief. His statues are slender, youthful, often with a faint smile as though he knows a secret you don't. One stands at the edge of the track, its feet worn smooth from countless athletes touching it for luck before a run. You watch as a boy taps the toes of the statue, then sprints forward, his friends laughing at his superstition. Still, when their turn comes, they all tap the foot as well. Nearby, a sturdier figure looms, Heracles, muscles bulging, club resting at his side. The hero who embodied strength was a natural guardian of these places. A wreath of fresh leaves rests at the base of his statue, placed there by an athlete who muttered a prayer for endurance. Historians still argue whether these offerings were acts of genuine belief or cultural habit. Did athletes truly expect divine help, or did the rituals simply soothe nerves before competition? A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some gymnasiums reportedly had little altars where athletes sacrificed not grand animals but tiny tokens, cakes shaped like fists, or miniature javelins carved from wood. Imagine leaving a cupcake at the squat rack in your local gym, hoping for better deadlift form. Odd, yes, but strangely charming. The shrines themselves are peaceful. Incense burns faintly, its smoke curling in delicate spirals, mingling with the dust and olive oil in the air. The fragrance softens the sharpness of sweat, giving the gymnasium a strangely sacred perfume. You inhale deeply, the scent earthy and sweet, calming in its blend. You watch as a group gathers before Hermes' statue. They bow their heads, murmuring prayers together. One whispers, "Feet swift, heart steady, breath calm." Another adds, "No shame in losing if the gods smile." Their words weave into a lullaby of belief, quiet but sincere. The group disperses, heading back to the track, lighter somehow, as though the prayer itself carried weight away from their shoulders. The trainers, usually stern, sometimes soften here. One lights a small lamp near an altar, then turns back to his students with the same calm authority. You realize that even discipline in this space bends gently toward reverence. The gods are part of the gymnasium's rhythm, as present as the sand and the strigils. As dusk deepens, the shrines glow with lamplight. The statues seem to breathe in the flickering shadows, their faces shifting with each gust of wind. Athletes pass by quietly, some bowing, others merely glancing. No one mocks, no one scoffs. Belief is casual, integrated, as natural as stretching before a run. You lean near the statue of Heracles, tracing the cool marble of his club with your fingers. Around you, incense smoke drifts lazily, the air thick with calm. The shrines hum softly, not demanding attention but offering it if you wish. And you realize the gymnasium is more than training or pride. It is also a sacred space, a quiet prayer written in stone and sweat. You pause beneath the colonnade, where conversation drifts in a different register. Quieter, a touch uneasy, like sandals hesitating at a threshold. A knot of men is debating a subject that sits at the edge of the gymnasium's polished calm. Women. Not as goddesses or muses or distant mothers, but as potential eyes at the edge of the sand. Watchers, maybe even participants. The gymnasium's world has been so confidently male that even raising the question rustles the plain leaves overhead. You let the murmurs wash over you. One man insists the gymnasium is, by definition, a men's space. Another suggests there have been, at least in some cities, moments when lines blurred. Someone points out the obvious. Training here is performed naked, gymnos, and that fact is more than custom. It is architecture, expectation, the very grammar of the place. You glance back toward the wrestling pit and understand how the nakedness itself seals the door. Yet the discussion doesn't vanish. It eddies around facts, stories, and what-ifs, steady as the dust in sunbeams. A mainstream fact hums in the group's consensus. At the Olympic Games held for Zeus at Olympia, married women were formally banned from attending the contests, the law as firm as the stadium stones. Unmarried girls may have watched certain events from a distance, and the priestess of Demeter, honored even in Zeus's precinct, held a special seat. Still, the rule for wives was clear enough to live on in memory like a chiseled inscription. You picture the sanctuary swelling with men, garlands, and dust, while households farther away kept their own pace, listening for news in the clatter of returning footsteps. But stories slide under rules the way water finds cracks in stone. The men mention a tale you've heard in whispers, a widow named Kalipatira, some say Phereniki, who disguised herself as a male trainer to see her son compete. When joy overcame caution and she vaulted a barrier, her cloak snagged, revealing her body. She was not punished. Her lineage of champions saved her. But henceforth, the story goes, trainers had to enter the stadium uncloaked to prove themselves male. You can't help a small smile. As policy responses go, that is both extremely specific and very on-brand for a culture already committed to nudity. Imagine your modern gym-changing dress code after one dramatic fan moment. All coaches must now arrive in even less. Human resources would spontaneously combust. The debate rolls on, soft but persistent. A philosopher proposes that modesty and public nudity cannot share the same bench. Another counters that modesty is more about intention than textiles. Historians still argue whether women ever appeared as spectators at everyday training, perhaps tucked in shaded galleries, or whether such sightings belong to the realm of optimistic anecdote. The evidence is a patchwork. Vast scenes open to interpretation, shards of law codes, second-hand moralizing. Like trying to reconstruct a whole colonnade from a single fluted drum, you squint and infer, and the picture shimmers. You drift a few steps and listen to a different cluster. They bring up Sparta. That perennial exception slipped into every Athenian conversation like an olive pit in a pastry. Spartan girls, they say, ran, wrestled, and threw, clothed by local standards, but far more publicly than most Greek communities allowed. There, the argument went, strong mothers raise strong sons, and civic strength begins in the nursery. You can almost see the scene. Girls sprinting along a dusty lane, hair unbound, the Doric breeze applauding. Even so, the men agree, a Spartan-style spectacle would draw scandalized eyebrow acrobatics here. The gymnasium you stand in remains a stage written for male bodies and male politics. And yet, women move along the edges of this world in their own rhythms. You think of the Heraia at Olympia, races for young women in honor of Hera, tunics hitched short, feet pattering the same earth where men thunder for Zeus. Different day, different rules, same sacred grove breathing both names. The fact settles warm in your chest. The landscape can hold more than one script. The track remembers every foot that learns its curve. A small, quirky tidbit flickers from someone's memory. An inscription, half rumor, half scholarship, about a city where, on a particular feast day, women left tiny woven garlands on a gymnasium doorway at dawn, a silent wish for the boy's good health and the city's future. No stepping over the threshold, no watching of discus arcs, just a wreath set down like a soft knock on a door that would not open. Whether the story is perfectly true or gilded by time hardly matters. You feel the gentleness of the gesture, the way care can travel without entering. You step into a sliver of shade and let your eyes adjust. The sand glows pale. The statues keep their considerate silence. A trainer passes by, hears the debate, and shrugs. The rules are older than my knees, he says, as if that settles it. Perhaps it does for him, but the men continue, testing the boundary like a fence with one loose slat. Can a mother watch her boy train from behind a screen? Can a priestess nod blessing from the periphery? Can a festival unroll an exception the way a city unrolls a new track of sand? The questions braid themselves into calm air. You notice how the question changes the way you hear the gymnasium. Every scrape of a strigil, every laugh from the colonnade, every thud of a discus now sounds like a message that someone outside cannot hear firsthand. You think of doorways and echoes, of stories carried home like warm bread wrapped in cloth. If the place is a heart, then women, often, are the arteries beyond its walls, distributing the news, the pride, the cautionary tales, the small triumphs of boys who ran faster today than yesterday. The shrines you saw earlier seem to lean in. Hermes tilts toward travelers, messengers across thresholds. Heracles nods toward labor born in many forms. If a gymnasium is a civic poem in stone and sand, women are lines spoken off stage that still shape the play. You sense it in the way men choose their words when they leave, what they exaggerate, what they soften, which details of oil and dust and bruises are allowed through the domestic doorway. A young athlete wanders past, hair still damp from the baths, and admits quietly to the group that his mother ties a ribbon to the fig tree by their courtyard before every festival. For luck, he says, embarrassed but smiling. No one mocks him. A few nod. One confesses that his aunt leaves honey cakes for Hermes on cold mornings. The room of rules feels less rigid for a heartbeat, and more like a tapestry where official threads are bright and thick. But the pattern is finished by the small, soft strands that only show when the light tilts. In the distance, the running track resumes its metronome. Sand lifts and falls. The debate dissolves back into routine. You feel the resignation, but not bitterness. The boundary remains, yet the question lingers like incense. Sweet, persistent, unwilling to vanish entirely. You think of tomorrow's dawn, when someone may again leave a garland on a threshold, and someone else will step over it, carrying both law and longing in the same stride. As the afternoon folds itself into shade, you drift forward, hearing the city beyond the walls, a market's soft clatter, a child's shout swallowed by distance. Inside, the gymnasium keeps its pace, naked bodies in motion, measured voices, the slow grooming of sand. Outside, other rhythms answer. Between them, a door that is mostly closed, sometimes ajar, never entirely forgotten. You breathe with both worlds for a moment, and then let the air out slowly, as if setting a wreath down, as if smoothing a ribbon, as if signing your name to a story told from the edge. You wander into a breezier corner of the gymnasium, where the atmosphere shifts again. The familiar rhythm of local citizens training together is interrupted by voices with unfamiliar accents, clothing draped in different styles, and sandals cut in shapes you don't recognize. These are visitors, foreigners from other lands, passing through the city on trade or diplomatic missions. Some watch with wide-eyed fascination, others with amused disbelief. A group of Phoenician traders leans against a column, their dyed robes vivid against the pale stone. One gestures toward the running track, chuckling as men sprint by in their customary state of undress. "They train naked," he mutters to his companion. "In Tyre, even fishermen keep their tunics on." His friend laughs, shaking his head, though you notice neither turns away. The novelty holds them like moths to a lamp. Nearby, an Egyptian traveler traces the fluted shaft of a column, murmuring that the symmetry reminds him of temples along the Nile. His gaze, however, lingers on the athletes throwing discs. They move like dancers, he says softly. A Greek citizen beside him puffs up proudly, explaining how the discus embodies harmony and proportion. You smile. Cross-cultural exchange disguised as casual chit-chat. Historians still argue how often foreigners were welcomed as spectators or even allowed to participate. Some sources suggest non-Greeks could watch training but rarely joined, their presence tolerated but not embraced. Others hint at occasional exceptions, a guest allowed to demonstrate his own wrestling style or foreign footwork. The evidence is scattered, like pottery shards pieced together into a blurry picture. You recall a quirky tidbit. There are accounts of Persians mocking Greek athletes for their obsession with nudity, claiming it was immodest and unnecessary. One Persian ambassador supposedly quipped that the Greeks spent more time oiling themselves than ruling their cities. True or not, it's the kind of observation that would echo in jokes long after the ambassador left. Yet here, in this courtyard, the exchange is softer. You notice a Greek boy shyly approaching a foreigner in a bright red cloak, asking about the dye. The man explains it comes from crushed shells, showing a small sample from his pouch. The boy's eyes widen, fascinated, and he runs off to tell his friends. The chatter swells. Suddenly, the gymnasium is not just a place of local pride, but of wonder. Of stories carried from distant lands. One traveler from the Black Sea gestures toward the wrestlers and mutters something in a language you don't recognize. His Greek companion translates. He says in his home they wrestle too, but in mud, not sand. The crowd bursts into laughter, half horrified, half intrigued. The visitor grins, enjoying their reaction. You can almost see the thought forming in some boy's mind. Mud wrestling. Now there's a change of pace. The presence of outsiders also highlights the civic pride you noticed earlier. A magistrate walks them through the colonnade, gesturing to the polished fountains and newly swept courtyards, his tone swelling with pride. He doesn't say it outright, but you hear it in his cadence. Look how civilized we are. Look how fine our gymnasium stands. The visitors nod politely, though one whispers that the oiling ritual still seems peculiar. The sounds in this corner are richer now, Greek and foreign tongues blending into a gentle chorus. The air carries hints of imported spices from the travelers' packs, mixing with the olive oil and dust. For a moment, the gymnasium feels like the world's crossroads, where sweat meets silk, where sand meets story. You settle onto a bench and let the scene drift over you. Locals explaining customs, foreigners laughing, children staring in awe at bright fabrics and strange words. It is not loud, not chaotic. It is a gentle curiosity, a shared fascination that hums like bees moving between blossoms. And, as you close your eyes, you realize the gymnasium isn't just a place of training or civic pride. It is also a window to the wider world, a stage where foreigners glimpse Greek life, and Greeks glimpse how strange their habits look through another's eyes. Both sides laugh softly. Both sides learn. And the whole exchange feels like a lullaby sung in many accents. You step away from the chatter of visiting traders, letting their voices fade into the steady hum of the gymnasium. What captures you now is not the bustle of people, but the silent poetry of the place itself. The architecture demands your attention, quietly but insistently, like a hand tugging at your sleeve. The first thing you notice are the colonnades. Row after row of Doric columns stand at attention, their fluted shafts rising in simple, sturdy rhythm. Each base is worn smooth where countless sandals have brushed against the stone. If you run your hand along one, you feel faint grooves carved by centuries of fingertips, casual touches that accidentally became a collective engraving. The capitals are plain, almost austere, yet together the columns weave an atmosphere of calm dignity, as if saying, "Nothing frantic happens here, all things in rhythm." Between the columns, you glimpse the courtyards unfolding. Plane trees spread their broad leaves, casting cool pools of shadow onto the sand. Their branches creak softly in the breeze, their roots pushing gently against stone foundations, reminding you that even marble yields to time. Beneath the trees, low benches invite rest. The air is cooler here, tinged with the faint sweetness of crushed leaves and the sharper bite of resin drifting from torches. Fountains punctuate the courtyards. One trickles steadily into a shallow basin, water glinting in the afternoon sun. Boys splash their hands in it, laughing softly, while older men cup the water to rinse faces flushed from training. The sound is soothing, a liquid heartbeat blending with the scrape of strigils and the drone of voices. You pause beside the basin, dipping your fingers, letting the coolness trail across your skin before it drips back, rejoining the endless cycle. You glance upward and notice the roofline of the colonnade. Terracotta tiles glow red in the sun, their edges chipped but still neatly fitted. Gaps allow shafts of light to pierce through, painting golden patches across the dusty ground. A swallow darts in and out, its wings beating silently as it disappears into the rafters. The gymnasium, it seems, has room for more than athletes and philosophers. Even the birds claim their niches. Historians still argue about the layout of gymnasiums, whether they followed a standard design across cities or adapted to local terrain. Some ruins suggest sprawling complexes with multiple courtyards and lecture halls. Others reveal simpler arrangements, stripped down to tracks and baths. The truth, as always, shifts with the sand. But what remains constant is the intention. A space not only for exercise but for harmony, with architecture itself encouraging both movement and contemplation. You recall a quirky tidbit. Some gymnasiums planted rows of trees so deliberately symmetrical that passers-by swore they were more orderly than soldiers on parade. Imagine a grove so neatly aligned that even the birds seemed embarrassed to perch out of line. The Greeks loved their geometry, and even their shade trees obeyed it. As you stroll slowly, your senses drink in the space. Stone cool beneath your fingertips, sand warm beneath your feet, the smell of olive oil mingling with damp earth near fountains. The echoes of footsteps bounce gently along colonnades, never harsh, always softened by stone and wood. The entire architecture acts like a cradle for sound, rocking it back and forth until it lulls. In one corner, you notice an inscription carved into the base of a column. It praises a benefactor for funding repairs, the letters crisp despite their age. You trace the grooves lightly, imagining the mason's careful hand, each letter tapped out slowly, patiently. The column becomes more than stone. It becomes memory, voice, permanence. You tilt your head back and look across the entire span of the gymnasium. The colonnades stretch like open arms, enclosing courtyards filled with dust, shade, and laughter. The geometry is simple, but in its simplicity lies peace. This isn't a place of clutter or chaos. It is measured, deliberate, like a lullaby sung in stone. As you breathe deeply, the architecture itself seems to breathe back. Columns exhale coolness, fountains murmur, trees whisper, shadows lengthen across sand. And you realize the gymnasium is not just a building. It is a rhythm you can walk through, a harmony of stone, water, and shade, designed to quiet the body even as it trains. You ease along the colonnade where shade lies thick as cool cloth, and the murmurs take on a different timbre, quieter, clipped, practiced. Between the thuds of a discus landing and the soft rasp of a strigil, you hear promises in miniature. There, just beyond the fountain, a man in a clean chiton chats with 3 runners cooling on the bench. He's not shouting, not posturing. He is listing repairs he will prioritize, the price of barley he hopes to steady, the respect he vows to show the elders who sweep these very paths at dawn. You realize you've stepped into the gymnasium's gentlest theater. Politics conducted in sandals and low voices, with the occasional punctuation mark of a javelin slicing air. Nothing here resembles a rally. It's more like a stroll, a series of conversations stitched together by nods and handshakes, as if policy were a kind of slow calisthenic. One candidate, hair damp from a courtesy lap around the track, leans forward like a sympathetic uncle. I will fund fresh sand for the wrestling pit. I will petition for more olive oil in winter. I will keep the lamps lit late for the boys studying Homer. The runner beside him smiles, because even if lamps and sand are small things fill a day the way grains fill a courtyard. You remember how donors had seats carved with their names. Promises, too, want to be written into stone. A mainstream truth settles calmly in your mind. In many Greek cities, Athens most famously, public life ran on offices filled by lot or by vote, on magistrates who reported to assemblies, and on liturgies, those civil obligations whereby the wealthy sponsored public needs. A chorus, a worship, a festival, sometimes even the gymnasium's upkeep. Choragos, triarch, gymnasiarch. The titles drift like incense over dusty stone. The gymnasium is the perfect place to meet the men who might shoulder such duties, because here every sentence is tempered by breath and sweat. Here, a candidate cannot forget the smell of the people he intends to govern. A trainer pads past with the serene authority of someone who has seen 10 election cycles and 20 discus seasons. He pauses just long enough to murmur, "Promises are best kept in rhythm. 1, 2, repeat." And the candidate, to his credit, laughs softly and repeats his pledge, not louder but steadier. Historians still argue whether gymnasia functioned as primary hubs of recruitment or merely as comfortable extensions of elite networks already humming in the agora. Either way, the colonnade hosts a choreography: policy, courtesy, repetition, policy, courtesy, repetition. Like a warm-up, you barely notice until your muscles agree to follow. You lean against a column and watch the choreography ripple outward. At the fountain, a rival candidate compliments an old mason on the recent repairs. You've heard that measured tapping of chisels for days now. He asks about stone prices, nodding at the answer as if the budget sits in his palm like a smooth pebble. Nearby, a group of youths intercept a council member and rattle off grievances. The track needs raking more often. The flute player's corner lacks a lamp. The bathhouse roof drips when it should simply steam. The council member listens, then does something more persuasive than any speech. He writes the complaints into his wax tablet, while the boys watch the stylus carve neat grooves. Words made into marks, marks into memory. It is a performance designed to calm both the audience and the performer. Politics here avoids high drama. The gymnasium does not permit it. Throw a discus while shouting your platform and you'll pull a shoulder. Try to declaim over the flute practice and a trainer will give you the kind of look that causes even demagogues to discover their indoor voices. A quirky tidbit floats up from local gossip. One city supposedly posted a tiny tablet by the Palestra reading "No slogans scratched on columns." Apparently, the temptation to campaign via impromptu graffiti, the ancient equivalent of slapping a sticker on a locker, proved too strong for some aspiring statesman with idle nails. You can almost see the magistrate sighing as he ordered the rule, the way one might outlaw sprinting with a strigil. Still, political theater finds its props. A would-be gymnasiarch gestures toward the oil room and mentions, as lightly as a leaf falling, that he has secured a cheaper supplier for winter. Heads lift at once. Oil is not abstract here. It's the daily glaze before the daily scrape, the quiet sheen of belonging. Another pledges a cart of fresh sand before the festival, and the wrestlers look at him as if he has promised shade on a noonday. The proposals are modest, but the gymnasium is where modest things matter, and where grand promises are regarded the way trainers regard new footwork. Show me 3 days in a row, then I'll believe it. A philosopher wanders through, inevitably drawn to the scent of policy. He proposes a parable about justice balancing like a discus. Too much tilt and the throw veers wild. The candidate nods, smiling the smile of a man who has learned to appreciate parables without becoming trapped in them. "Then I will correct the tilt with careful hands," he says, and a boy snickers that careful hands are what cost him the last match. Laughter loosens the air. Even philosophy plays softer here, tuned to the room's heartbeat. On the bench nearest the track, 2 older men compare notes on names and youth. They're not kingmakers, they are careful listeners. One recalls a candidate's father who once paid to replace broken roof tiles after a storm. Quietly, without inscription. The other remembers the same man declining to demand front-row seats at the next festival. The story passes like a cup of watered wine, and you can feel it cool the ears of all who hear. Reputation in the gymnasium is not a marble statue. It is the worn smoothness of a column base, earned by 1,000 brushed encounters. The discus thumps, the fountain murmurs, a lyre thread trembles across the breeze from the music court. Everything conspires to slow the pulse. In this softness, the candidate's edges file down. Brags become anecdotes, plans become checklists, rivals become men willing to share shade while they wait a turn to speak. One of them even hands the other a fig, a small act that does more for the room than 100 ring-struck oaths. You imagine scribes somewhere trying to capture how generosity felt at that exact moment, and settling for, "He offered fruit." Remember the ribbon that pinged off mid-race? Someone teases a sprinter aligned with a candidate's faction. "We'll tie yours better next time, and the city's too." The joke lands lightly, but the metaphor hangs there, neat as a well-knotted headband. Tie things properly. Keep them snug through the turn. Make sure they don't fly off when speed arrives. Politics as a ribbon. Plain, practical, a thing you notice only when it fails. As the light leans honey gold, lamps wake along the walls. The little wax tablets close with soft clicks. Hands are clasped. Small promises are left to steep in memory like thyme in warm oil. The candidates drift away without fanfare, and the gymnasium returns to its bass note. Breath, dust, water, string. You stretch your legs and feel how the place itself voted. Against noise, for rhythm. Against spectacle, for repetition. Against thunder, for the slow, convincing tap of a stylus cutting a line that might still be legible when the next discus lands. You step back into the main court, and the air tastes faintly of olive and evening. Somewhere, a trainer counts softly. 1, 2, repeat, and you understand why campaigning here rarely erupts into frenzy. The gymnasium makes every man keep pace with his breath. And a city that listens to breath is, at least for this hour between sand and lamplight, a city hard to rattle and easy to trust. You wander back through the cooling courtyards, where shadows lengthen like stretched cloth across the sand. The gymnasium still hums, but the tone has shifted. Something subtle has entered the air, a change you can almost taste, like figs turning from ripe to just a little overripe. The rhythms of this place, so steady and timeless, are beginning to fray. The decline hasn't yet arrived with trumpets, but you can feel its footsteps approaching. You overhear an older man sigh as he adjusts his cloak. "In my youth," he says, "we trained only in Greek ways. Now, boys imitate the Romans." His companion shrugs, less troubled, but the complaint lingers. You follow his gaze to the track, where an athlete practices with a heavier, more military style, swinging weights as though preparing for the Legion rather than the games. His stance is efficient, practical, less graceful than the flowing arcs you've seen earlier. The Greek ideal of beauty and motion is slowly being edged by Rome's obsession with utility. Historians still argue how sudden or gentle this transformation was. Did the Roman conquest smother Greek traditions quickly, or did customs linger like smoke, curling long after the fire changed hands? The ruins tell only fragments. Some gymnasiums expanded under Roman patronage, while others fell quiet, their courtyards echoing with weeds instead of laughter. The signs of change whisper everywhere. A group of boys sits idly, more interested in dice games than wrestling. A trainer scolds them, but half-heartedly, perhaps weary, perhaps resigned. Another group debates politics, but the names they speak are Roman governors, not local magistrates. The colonnade becomes a stage where foreign voices replace familiar ones, and pride flickers more dimly. A quirky tidbit stirs in your memory. Under Roman influence, some gymnasiums added decorative statues of emperors, their stern faces glaring down at the training grounds. Imagine doing your push-ups under the cold marble stare of Augustus, who never broke a sweat in this courtyard. It's both absurd and oddly fitting. You pause by the bathhouse entrance. The steam still rises, but fewer men drift inside. One mutters that the Roman baths in the Forum are grander, with hotter pools and finer mosaics. The allure of the old gymnasium fades under the weight of imported luxury. You imagine the building, proud for centuries, suddenly regarded as outdated, like an old gym losing members to a flashy chain down the street. Still, decline here is not collapse. It's a slow softening, a gentle dimming of the lamps. You run your hand along a cracked column, feeling how the marble cools in the evening air. The stone still stands, the rituals still unfold, but the edges are worn smoother, the voices less urgent. The gymnasium no longer holds the same central gravity. The athletes who remain cling to tradition. One wrestles in the sand with careful form, repeating ancient moves even as his friends wander off to play dice. Another sings a Homeric line aloud before sprinting, though his voice carries into near-empty stands. You feel the poignancy, like a lullaby hummed to a child who has already drifted into another dream. The city beyond the walls is louder now. Roman voices in the marketplace, new laws, new customs. Inside, The gymnasium feels like an echo chamber, preserving traditions that the world outside has begun to outgrow. You breathe it in, both comforting and bittersweet. As night gathers, the lamps burn lower. The colonnades stand the same, the fountains trickle, the statues gleam faintly in the glow. Yet you sense the weight of time pressing in, whispering that this calm cannot last forever. And, as you lean against a column, eyes heavy, you realize you are witnessing the gymnasium not only as it is, but as it slowly slips away. Still steady, still soothing, but fading like the last note of a flute echoing into dusk. You stir awake from your leaning rest against the column, lulled by the memory of fading traditions. The gymnasium still hums with life, but now your ears catch something different. Rules being recited, some solemn, others almost comical. A trainer stands by the track, wax tablet in hand, reading aloud to a group of yawning boys. These are the regulations, the do's and don'ts of the space, and they range from practical to downright peculiar. The first few make sense. Oil must be applied before wrestling, sandals removed at the edge of the track, no weapons carried within the grounds. The boys nod, impatient, already having heard it all 100 times. But then comes the odd one. Any runner who sneezes on the track shall repeat his lap. Laughter ripples through the group. One boy fakes a sneeze, then groans dramatically as his friends tease him. You grin, remembering how you once heard a city even fined racers for such interruptions. Apparently, a sneeze was more scandalous than a stumble. Another rule insists no one should argue with trainers during a match. The penalty? Extra laps, of course. A boy mutters, "Better to lose the match than gain the laps," earning him a sharp glance from the trainer. The boys laugh softly but fall quiet again, their mischief absorbed back into the dusty air. Historians still argue how seriously these rules were enforced. Were they iron laws or flexible guidelines bent by circumstance? The fragments that survive suggest both, a mixture of discipline and humor, a civic need for order softened by daily reality. You sense that much of it depended on the mood of the trainer and the patience of the group. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. In some gymnasiums, punishments included sweeping the sand smooth after training, a chore as tedious as it was endless. Imagine being caught breaking a rule, then sentenced to rake sand under the hot sun while your friends wrestle nearby. The task sounds dull, yet strangely calming. The endless scrape of rake against dust, smoothing chaos into order again. As you walk further, you notice little inscriptions carved into walls by mischievous hands. Some are names, others crude doodles, one a boast about a discus throw that surely never happened. Officials probably banned such graffiti, yet here they are, etched defiantly, proof that rules often inspire rebellion. The scratches seem half serious, half playful, echoes of boys testing the boundaries of authority. The rules extend even into the baths. You overhear an attendant reminding men not to splash excessively, lest the water cloud with oil. Another insists strigils must be scraped outside the warm pools, not in them. You picture a board posted somewhere. Please refrain from flinging oil at fellow bathers. It makes you chuckle softly because human nature never changes. The rhythm of enforcement is steady, not harsh. Trainers speak in calm voices. Attendants repeat themselves patiently. Boys roll their eyes but comply. The atmosphere is less military discipline and more gentle nudging. The gymnasium is a place of order, yes, but also of familiarity. The rules don't crush. They cradle, keeping the flow predictable, soothing, repetitive. As dusk settles deeper, the rules begin to sound like lullabies themselves. Phrases recited daily until they blur into the background, steady and unchanging. No sandals on the track. Oil before wrestling. No sneezing mid-race. Sweep the sand smooth. Repeat tomorrow. You lean back under the colonnade, hearing the cadence of regulation, the soft laughter of boys, the weary but affectionate tone of trainers. Even rules, you realize, become part of the gymnasium's rhythm. Not loud, not oppressive, but a calm script that carries the place from one day into the next. The rules echo faintly in your ears as you drift into another circle of conversation. One less about discipline and more about interpretation. Here, men lean against columns, scrolls tucked under their arms, voices measured yet animated. They aren't debating the finer points of running technique or the cost of fresh sand. They're circling a question as slippery as oil on a wrestler's back. Why exactly did the Greeks train naked? One man, gray-bearded and certain, insists it was practical. Clothes snag. They weigh you down. Skin alone is swiftest. His hand slices the air to mimic the unencumbered stride of a runner. Another scoffs, pointing out that athletes in other lands, Egypt, Persia, train clothed and manage just fine. His voice sharpens. It was not about practicality, it was about ideals. To strip was to show purity, honesty, and the equality of citizen before citizen. Their students nod or frown, some visibly torn. Historians still argue the same point centuries later, their ink as restless as these voices are calm. Was nudity simply a matter of efficiency, or was it a conscious cultural choice, a philosophical statement draped in nothing at all? You lean closer, feeling the hum of the debate settle in your chest. A quirky tidbit flutters into memory. Some claim the custom began when a runner at Olympia lost his loincloth mid-race and discovered, to his surprise, that he ran faster without it. Others say a rule was made soon after requiring nudity. True or not, it's a tale that has the ring of myth, like the first jogger who invented sneakers by accident. You smile at the image, one man's wardrobe malfunction rippling into 1,000 years of tradition. The philosophers around you offer their own metaphors. One compares nakedness to truth in argument. No coverings, no distractions. Another claims it is a form of democracy, where the rich cannot flaunt costly fabrics, and the poor cannot be shamed by simple tunics. The naked body levels the playing field, though he adds with a smirk that some bodies level it more flatteringly than others. The group chuckles, and you catch the sleepy humor beneath their words. Not everyone is convinced. A skeptical youth mutters that nudity just makes sand stick in awkward places. The circle erupts in laughter, even the gray-bearded philosopher unable to keep a straight face. The youth shrugs, triumphant, his point scored not through logic but through universal experience. You notice how the debate weaves seamlessly with the environment. As wrestlers lock in the pit nearby, their glistening forms are both proof and provocation. As runners lap the track, their strides provide silent arguments for efficiency. As statues of Hermes and Heracles loom, their idealized forms echo the philosophical point about nudity as celebration of beauty. The gymnasium itself seems to participate in the discussion, every corner offering evidence for one side or the other. The tone of the debate, though, is gentle. No one shouts, no one storms away. Voices rise and fall like the waves of the sea, rhythmic, soothing. Even disagreement here feels like part of the gymnasium's lullaby, a calm wrestling of words to match the calm wrestling of bodies in sand. You lean back against a column, letting the voices wash over you. Practicality, symbolism, myth, democracy. Each theory drifts like incense, rising, curling, fading. There is no final answer, only the rhythm of minds circling a question that refuses to settle. And, as the debate hums on, you feel your own thoughts loosen, drifting into the calm uncertainty. Whether it was to run faster, to honor the gods, or simply because one unlucky runner lost his loincloth, the reason hardly matters now. What matters is the rhythm of the discussion, the way voices rise and soften, the way ideas ripple like discus arcs across the sand. You close your eyes and let the question remain unanswered, because sometimes the lack of resolution is the most soothing thing of all. The debate about nakedness still hums faintly in the air as you stroll out toward the open courtyard again. A breeze passes through the colonnade, carrying dust, olive oil, and something else. Your own wandering thoughts, now turning toward the world you left behind. You can't help it. The gymnasium, in all its slow rhythms, invites comparisons. And suddenly you're looking at modern gyms through the sleepy lens of ancient stone. Imagine stepping into your local fitness center. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry bees. Music thumps far too loudly, and everywhere you turn, someone is scrolling their phone between sets. Compare that with the Greek gymnasium, where the only soundtrack is sandals scuffing, flutes playing softly, and fountains murmuring in the background. One feels like an airport terminal, the other like a monastery with barbells. You notice the athletes hefting halteres, those stone weights smooth from centuries of hands. Now picture your dumbbells, rubberized, color-coded, sometimes left lying in a corner like abandoned puppies. The Greeks repeated their motions slowly, calmly, with trainers murmuring reminders about moderation. Modern gyms, half the time someone is grunting loud enough to be mistaken for a mythological monster. Historians still argue whether today's obsession with volume, both in sound and in weight, really builds discipline, or just more Instagram followers. And then there's clothing. Here in the gymnasium, nudity is the expectation, simplicity itself. No spandex leggings, no branded sneakers, no endless debate over the right compression shirt. Just oil, dust, and skin under the sun. You grin, imagining someone walking into a modern spin class and announcing, "I'm going full Greek today." Security would probably intervene within minutes. A quirky tidbit flits into your mind. In some modern gyms, mirrors cover every wall, as though reflection itself were the most important exercise. The Greeks had mirrors too, but small, polished bronze discs tucked discreetly in corners. They weren't there for selfies. They were practical tools for posture. And yet you suspect the impulse was the same. The quiet pride of watching yourself in motion, catching proof that the body is learning. The sense of community differs too. In the Greek gymnasium, exercise, philosophy, politics, and gossip mingle seamlessly. Here, a wrestling match might pause so a philosopher can insert a metaphor about justice. Over there, a politician smooths his pitch between discus throws. Modern gyms, most conversations revolve around whether the treadmill Wi-Fi works and how expensive protein powder has become. You smile softly. Both worlds, in their own ways, weave daily life into sweat. You lean against the column, eyes drifting closed as you compare further. The smell of ancient oil, nutty, warm, faintly sweet, versus the chemical tang of disinfectant spray bottles, the soothing scrape of strigils versus the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, the hush of colonnades and plane trees versus the relentless clang of weight stacks. If you had to choose a soundtrack for sleep, you know which one wins. The gymnasium feels timeless. But the echoes in modern gyms remind you that the impulse itself hasn't changed. Gather together, move the body, test its limits, share stories, and then recover in community. The tools shift, the clothing, or lack thereof, shifts. The atmosphere hums in different registers. But beneath it all is the same human heartbeat. You open your eyes again and watch a runner pass by, dust rising behind him in a golden cloud. For a moment, it could be any age, sand or rubber track, discus or kettlebell, oil or protein shake. It's all rhythm, repetition, persistence. You smile drowsily, thinking that whether it's bronze strigils or neon yoga mats, the point has always been the same: to move, to belong, to breathe together. The comparisons to modern gyms fade like mist, and you find yourself pulled back fully into the twilight of this ancient courtyard. The day has slowed, its pulse softening with every lengthening shadow. The wrestlers have gone quiet, their pit smoothed by the rake of a tired attendant. The runners finish their final laps, footsteps muted in the dusk. You walk slowly beneath the colonnades, savoring what feels like the closing act of the gymnasium's long performance. Lamps are being lit one by one. Their flames flicker against polished stone, painting the columns in strokes of honeyed light. The statues, Hermes, Heracles, glow faintly, their edges softened by shadow. Oil jars are corked and tucked away, strigils rinsed and hung to dry. The air carries the warm scent of extinguished torches, mingled with the sweetness of figs shared among lingering companions. You move toward the heart of the courtyard, where benches rest beneath broad plane trees. A small cluster of boys still lingers there, recounting the day's funniest missteps. An awkward fall during wrestling, a discus that sailed sideways into a pile of sandals. Their laughter is hushed, softened by evening, as though even their humor has grown sleepy. An older man hushes them gently, but with a smile. The gymnasium is winding down, and the voices follow its cue. You pause by the fountain, where water still trickles steadily into the basin. In the lamplight it gleams like liquid bronze, rippling softly. A man leans over to wash his hands, splashing his face before sighing with relief. You mimic the gesture, dipping your fingers into the cool water, feeling its freshness cut through the lingering warmth of the day. The droplets slide across your skin, carrying the faint taste of mineral earth. Historians still argue whether gymnasiums remained open late into the night or closed their gates at dusk. Some ruins suggest lamps and braziers kept the spaces alive after dark, while others insist citizens left once shadows swallowed the sand. Watching the lamps flicker, you sense both might be true. Tonight, the gymnasium lingers, unhurried to release its hold. A quirky tidbit drifts into memory. One ancient writer joked that owls grew fat near gymnasiums because so many boys tossed scraps of food at them after dusk. You glance at the branches overhead and imagine little round eyes blinking down, feasting on forgotten olives. It makes you chuckle softly, the perfect sleepy image to crown the day. As you stroll once more along the colonnade, you notice how the rhythm has softened. Earlier, everything was motion: running feet, swinging halteres, scraping strigils, debating voices. Now it's the rhythm of stillness. Sand settled smooth, lamps glowing steady, voices murmuring low. Even the statues seem calmer, their shadows leaning long across the walls. You stop near the entrance, turning back for one last look. The gymnasium stretches behind you in twilight, its courtyards wrapped in soft glow, its colonnades cradling the night. You can almost hear the echo of the day still humming in the sand. Footsteps, laughter, debates, sighs, but fading, fading, until only calm remains. And, as you breathe deeply, you realize this final walk is less a departure than a lull. The gymnasium closes its eyes slowly, gently, like a companion drifting into sleep. You step outside into the cool evening air, carrying the rhythm of stone, sand, and oil within you, as steady and soothing as your own heartbeat. You stand just inside the gate, the night rubbing cool fingertips along your arms, and you take one last slow look across the gymnasium. The lamps breathe small golden circles onto the sand. Columns fade into the kind of blue darkness that makes edges kind. Voices have gone quiet. Even the fountain seems to pour more softly, as if mindful of sleep. You draw a breath, and the place feels like a lung exhaling. Oil, dust, watered wine, faint incense. Then settling, finally, into rest. You start toward the exit, steps unhurried, letting the memories of the day file themselves neatly like scrolls in a shelf. Wrestling sand. Running posts worn smooth, halteres rocking in a steady arc, the cool drag of a bronze strigil, the lazy flutes. Each piece clicks into place. A trainer passes you going the other way with an empty basket and nods the universal nod of the tired and satisfied. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The day has been long in the good way. At the corner where the colonnade bends, you pause near a niche where little oil flasks hang from pegs, each shaped with a craftsman's wink. One is a tiny hare, another a plump pomegranate, and a third a dolphin with its mouth as the spout. Those araboloi dangle like charms from leather thongs, ready to be looped over a wrist. It's a small, quirky truth. Even in a world of naked runners and stern trainers, someone still took time to make an oil bottle into a joke you can hold. You picture a boy choosing the dolphin because he swears it makes him faster, and you smile into the lamplight. Beyond the doorway, a slice of street shows stars stitched above the rooftops. You think of the way this naked place, this gymnasium born from gymnos, has been many things at once. A track, a bath, a school, a debating hall, a town square with sand for a floor. In Athens, there were whole worlds built on this idea, the academy and the lyceum, spaces where running tracks and lecture walks folded together, where Plato's students paced under trees, and Aristotle's followers compiled lists the way a careful runner counts laps. A mainstream fact stands steady here. Those famous schools were, at root, gymnasia, places where the mind kept time with the body's steps. You slip along the last shadowed stretch, fingers brushing stone as if to say goodbye, and your mind circles back to the day's most persistent question: why the nakedness? You remember the arguments, practical, symbolic, democratic, and how none of them finally canceled the others. Historians still argue whether the custom began from pure utility, or from an idealized notion of civic equality, or from a single race where a loincloth betrayed its wearer and the crowd saw a better way. You find yourself content with the uncertainty. Sleep loves an open window. A faint breeze sifts the plane leaves above you. Somewhere behind, a lyre gives one last testing hum before its strings go slack for the night. Farther off, an owl hoots, gentle punctuation to a long sentence. A boy jogs past carrying a broom almost taller than himself, headed to smooth the wrestling pit one more time. He drags the rake in tidy arcs, and the sand obediently forgets everything that happened today. You watch the lines vanish, and your shoulders drop another inch. It's comforting, this ritual erasing, a promise that tomorrow's footprints can be new. At the threshold, a small shrine to Hermes waits like a courteous doorman. Someone has left 3 olives in a shallow dish and drawn a tiny wing beside them with a wet fingertip. Already drying, already fading. You tap the base of the statue twice, imitating the boys who do it before they run, and murmur a thank you didn't know you were carrying. The god's marble smile looks exactly the same as this morning, which is to say, a little too knowing. You think about the larger world beyond the gate, the festivals winding like bright ribbons through the calendar, the truce that once paused swords so feet could fly, the Roman voices elbowing their way into the markets, the magistrates who count roof tiles like votes, the foreigners who stand at the rail and try not to stare. And still, under all of that, this place keeps its beat. Oil, sand, scrape, breath, splash, talk, laugh, lamp, hush. A city can change languages and laws, but a rhythm like this outlives decrees by simply repeating itself until everyone knows the steps. You let yourself lean on the gatepost a final moment, eyes half-lidded, and notice how the marble has been polished by thousands of palms doing exactly what yours does now. The stone is cool, then warm under your hand. The gate is a hinge between 2 kinds of quiet. The civic hush of the gymnasium and the private hush of night streets. You decide to take both. There's room for one last fact to tuck into your pocket like a lucky pebble. Many gymnasia were planted carefully with shade trees, plane, olive, poplar, because training mind and body asked for coolness as much as courage. This was never only about strain, it was about pace. The Greeks understood that a life can be shaped by the places where it slows down. You feel yourself shaped, just a little, by this one. You step out. The city exhales. The stars feel closer than they should. Behind you, the lamps glaze the sand like honey across bread, and ahead, the street holds the soft clatter of a cart on stone, a dog giving one disinterested bark, a neighbor closing a shutter. You turn your face to the night and carry the gymnasium with you the way oil carries light. Thin, quiet, persistent. And as you walk, your feet find a cadence you don't have to think about. Left, right, breath. A trainer's voice floats up from memory. 1, 2, repeat. And you do exactly that, smiling in the dark at how a day of dust and jokes and patient rules can leave you feeling rinsed. Tomorrow will have its laps and its arguments, its cracked tiles and its ribbons that fly off at the worst turn. But tonight belongs to stillness, to soft air, to the kind of sleep that arrives like a friend who knows the spare key. You reach the corner, glance back once more, and let the picture blur. Columns like quiet ribs, statues listening, sand without footprints, a shrine's tiny wing drying invisibly in the dark. Then you release it all, and the quiet releases you in return. Let the street grow softer now, the edges rounding, the air cooling with every step. Let the stone beneath your sandals become a kind of water, carrying you without effort, guiding you without asking. You have left the lamps behind, but a little of their warmth rides along your skin, the way a sunbeam lingers in closed eyes. Breathe in, long and low, and notice how the breath arrives the way the fountain arrived, steady, unhurried, sure of itself. Breathe out a little longer, as though you were smoothing a patch of sand with a slow rake, letting the day's marks fade back into level ground. The city has gone to half voice. Doors hush against their frames. A cup sets down somewhere far away and becomes only a thought of sound. The sky is the color of cool linen, stretched and breathable. You are walking, but the walk is almost dreaming. Your shoulders remember the weight of the air in the colonnade, the even kindness of shade. Your hands remember the cool of marble, the small shock of water on fingertips. Your ears remember the lonely flute line that drifted like a moth, then rested. Whatever needed to be fast has already had its turn. Whatever needed to be decided can wait until the lamps are lit again. Here, only the simple things ask for you. The next breath, the quiet step, the easy rhythm the trainer taught without trying. 1, 2, repeat. In, out, rest. Picture the wrestling sand smoothed to perfect quiet, the track waiting without expectation, the shrine's little wing dried invisible, the dolphin-shaped oil flask swinging once, twice, and settling. Picture the gymnasium asleep and discover that it teaches sleep even while it dreams. Let your jaw loosen. Let the eyes grow heavy. Let the breath sink low in the body, where it is warm and slow. You are safe to set everything down now, the way a strigil sets down its edge, the way a lamp gives up its flame. Good night. Good night. Good night.